Chapter 420. Rick went back with hope in his heart. Wuming and Hublitis quietly followed behind Rick and the others. What a joke. It was not easy to meet humans. It would be a huge loss if they did not follow them to figure out where the humans gathered. It had to be said that Rick and the others were really cautious. Wuming discovered that the place where he met Rick and the others was very far from their base. This was probably also for survival. If they were targeted by other races and needed to be sacrificed, they would not expose the hiding places of other humans. They came to a cave and watched Rick and the others walk in. Wuming speculated that this might be their base. Find a place to hide. Don't run around. I'll go in and take a look, Wuming instructed Hublitis. Wuming got Hublitis to hide and wait for him. Then, Wuming entered the cave in spirit form and followed Rick and the others. Ahem. After all, spirit form was quite practical. Moreover, Wuming's current body was created by himself, so he could naturally add extra small abilities at will. Spirit form, which could only be used by spirits, was easily done by Wuming with the help of the power of the origin and Wuming's understanding of spirit form. After all, the origin was the origin of everything. The reason why he did not add other abilities was that they were not powers that Wuming was familiar with. Adding them was quite troublesome, and even if he added them, he would not be used to them. Moreover, even if those super powerful abilities were added to this body, they would not be much stronger. Even Wuming's original abilities had been weakened, let alone other abilities. Therefore, Wuming only added spirit form to his body, and everything else was the same as his original body. Inside the cave, there was a long tunnel without any light, except for the torches that Rick and the others were holding. The top of the torch was not a flame, but a stone tied to it. This was a stone unique to this world. As long as it came into contact with water, the stone would absorb the water and emit light. It was very practical. The three of them each held a torch as they walked through the seemingly long tunnel. Rick, who was walking at the front of the cave, seemed to have sensed something. He instantly turned his head and looked at the tunnel behind him. What's wrong, Rick? Ivan and Oren, who were following behind Rick, didn't seem to want to answer. Rick took another long look into the dark tunnel. I'm fine. Let's go. He gradually landed behind Ivan and Oren, looking back from time to time. Gradually, the three of them went further and further away, leaving only the light of the torches. This is really surprising. Is it a sixth sense, or is it just a simple sense of vigilance? Wuming's voice rang out calmly. Wuming was still in his spirit form. Wuming once again cast a large number of concealment spells on himself before he felt at ease and followed Rick. Coming to the end of the tunnel, Wuming heard someone shout out these words excitedly. Wuming passed through the wall. Through his perception and eyes, Wuming saw the place where humans lived. This was a super-wide natural underground cave, but there were also signs of artificial modification. Countless colorful glowing stones decorated this natural karst cave, and in some places there was even land, with some grains that Wuming did not recognize growing on it. All kinds of humans were busy. Some were managing the land with grains, some were managing the terraced fields, and some were collecting water through special means. The houses were built directly on the mountain, making use of the independent space of the karst caves. This was a simple room, and there was even a stable that was used as a means of transportation. The humans lived in an orderly manner, almost like a small society. At the spot where Rick and the other two were, there were people who took away their item backpacks. A rose-haired girl hugged Rick, looking very worried. Daddy. At this time, a young voice was heard. A purple-haired girl ran towards the three of them and rushed into the arms of the uncle named Ivan. Oh. No, nah, did you listen to your big sister crone? Ivan hugged Nana lovingly and asked with a smile. No, nah is very obedient to big sister crone. Nong Na also knows how to write Nong Na's name. Look, Nong Na wrote it herself. Nana said as she picked up the unknown paper in her hand and showed it to Ivan. Oh, as expected of my daughter, you can write your own name. Daddy is proud of you. Ivan smiled from the bottom of his heart and stroked Nana's head. He, Nana laughed happily. Seeing this scene, Rick's heart was filled with uneasiness and shame. If it wasn't for the God who came in time, Nana probably wouldn't be able to see her father again. Rick lowered his head in self-blame. Rick, what happened? The rose-haired girl frowned as she looked at Rick, who had his head lowered. It seemed like a lot of things happened. It's okay, Crone. Rick shook his head and looked at Crone with fighting spirit in his eyes. Really, I told you to call me sister. Well, forget it, being able to return safely is better than anything else. Welcome back, Rick. Crone looked at Rick with displeasure at first, then her expression relaxed and she smiled at Rick. Yes, I'm back, Crone. Seeing this scene, Wuming nodded with satisfaction. Saving that human named Ivan wasn't in vain. Wuming in spirit form nodded with satisfaction. Then he didn't look at Rick and the others anymore. Instead, he left the place and went outside to meet up with Zayubrik. On the top of a slightly higher mountain nearby, Wuming and Zayubrik looked into the distance. Hey, Zayubrik, I think you should enter the lives of these humans. Wuming said without turning his head. Answer, Zayubrik has been abandoned by the Kikai race. How to deal with him is the power of the current owner of Zayubrik, nameless, Zayubrik said calmly. Your words are quite ambiguous. I'm not your master. Remember, no one can be the master of others, not even you, the Kikai race, because you are a race that is about to have a heart. Understand? Can't. Data flowed in Zayubrik's eyes as he stuttered this sentence. Well, you won't understand even if I tell you now. When you have a heart, you will understand without a teacher. Wuming smiled as he stroked Zayubrik's head. Wuming firmly believed that after living with humans for a period of time and with Wuming's guidance, Zayubrik would be able to understand a heart and have feelings. Because letting machines have feelings was one of the possibilities for humans. Chapter 421. Because of his bet with Wuming, after a few days, Rick didn't continue to stay in the base. Instead, he chose to continue collecting information. Perhaps because he didn't want anyone else to die, Rick didn't bring anyone else with him this time. Instead, he rode a horse-like means of transportation raised by humans and took the first step to prove the possibility of humans. Wuming and Hublitis naturally followed after seeing Rick leave. This is a great opportunity to send you into human life through Rick, Wuming said. Not only that, but Wuming was also curious about where Rick was going next. In this era where one could die if they weren't careful, it was impossible for humans like Rick to go out without prepared information. Flying in the sky, Wuming looked at the fully armed Rick with his superhuman vision, as well as the bags of food and water hanging from the beasts that functioned like horses. He easily deduced that Rick was going somewhere far away. A means of transportation for long-distance travel and at least 5 days of dry food and water. It didn't look like he was going for a casual stroll. Rick stopped moving forward and looked behind him vigilantly, making a puzzled sound. But it was obvious that he didn't find anything, so Rick continued on his way. He's quite vigilant, Wuming said while flying in the sky and relying on the concealment technique. Wuming and Hublitis relied on the concealment technique to fly in the sky from the beginning. Not to mention Rick, even other races might not be able to discover Wuming and Hublitis who were concealed by Wuming's technique. It seemed that in this era, not being vigilant would really lead to death. This time, Wuming was extra careful. He and Hublitis flew at a higher altitude and followed behind Rick. After following Rick for almost half a day, Rick finally stopped changing his route and began to accelerate towards a certain place at full speed. Because the earth had become the battlefield of various races, Rick kept changing his route. Perhaps it was because Rick had never been to his destination before, so he kept looking for the best route and marking it on the map. Wuming asked Sayubrik as he watched Rick move in this direction at the fastest speed possible. Is there anything noteworthy in this direction? Wuming asked out of curiosity. After all, Rick didn't seem to know how to change directions. Data flowed through Hubrick's yellow eyes, which were like warning lines, before he opened his mouth to answer Wuming. Answer: Sayubrick's database shows that ahead is the abandoned old capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. Oh, Wuming was intrigued. According to the intel, the Forest Elves and Goblins were sworn enemies, and Rick's destination this time was likely to be the former capital of the Forest Elves. In addition, Rick had found some good intel from the Goblins' crashed magic airship, so Wuming felt that Rick's target was the former capital of the Forest Elves, Marilyn. As the saying goes, the one who knows you best is your enemy, so it was normal to have information about your sworn enemy. Therefore, Wuming wasn't surprised that Rick had found information about the Forest Elves from the Goblins' crashed magic airship. I'm slightly interested in that place. Wuming's lips curled up. After all, even if it was an abandoned old capital, it was still the glory of the Forest Elves. It was like a gorgeous ruin that hid secrets. Let's go take a look in advance, Sayubrik, what do you think? Wuming asked Sayubrik. Answer: Sayubrik doesn't care. Everything will be decided by John Doe, Sayubrik said calmly. That won't do, Sayubrik. You have to learn how to think and ask questions. It's because humans know how to think that they can survive the war with other races. This is the prerequisite for you to obtain a heart, Sayubrik, Wuming said to Sayubrik as he shook his head calmly. After Sayubrik heard Wuming's words, the data in his eyes flowed again. After a few seconds, Sayubrik nodded. Understood, Sayubrik. I understand. Sayubrik nodded. Then, what do you think about us going to take a look first? Wuming repeated his question. I agree. Sayubrik isn't interested in the former capital of the Forest Elves. However, since John Doe wants to go, Sayubrik will accompany him. Sayubrik looked into Wuming's eyes and said seriously. Although Sayubrik seemed to be a little dependent on Wuming, Wuming felt that Sayubrik's current state was already very good. Then, let's go take a look first. Please lead the way for me. Wuming looked at Sayubrik with a smile. Sayubrik looked at Wuming's smile and nodded. Then, two meteors streaked across the sky. Because of the increase in altitude, Rick didn't notice that something was wrong and continued to move forward at full speed. However, even if Rick was riding a vehicle, it was still too slow for Wuming and Sayubrik. About 10 seconds later, Wuming saw a dilapidated city. Wuming and Sayubrik landed in front of the old capital of the Forest Elves, Merlren, and walked in through the gap. It was attacked, right? No wonder it was abandoned. Wuming looked at the traces of destruction inside Merlren. It was obviously not the power of nature, but man-made. Answer. According to the records in the database, this place was attacked by the skywing species, Sayubrik said calmly as he followed behind Wuming. Skywing species. No wonder it was destroyed like this, Wuming said knowingly. It could be said that the buildings in Merlren were basically destroyed, and there was no complete building at all. I'm afraid Rick will be very disappointed if he comes. After all, there was no doubt that Rick's purpose was to search for information, and it was unlikely that there would be any information in Merlren that had been destroyed. Unless the Forest Elves used magic to protect the information. Then, Wuming saw a complete sea of flowers filled with elves. There was no doubt that this place was protected by the Forest Elves' magic. There really is a place protected by magic. Wuming and Sayubrik walked over. Places protected by magic are usually the Forest Elves' treasure troves, laboratories, and other valuable places. Sayubrik explained to Wuming as he followed Wuming to the center of the flower bed. Are you saying that we've caught a big fish? Wu Ming's lips curled into a smile. Then, Wu Ming used magic to open the door on the floor. Want to take a look together, Hubrick? The reason why Wu Ming sent an invitation to Hubrick was because there might be a trap below, which represented danger. Agreed. Hubrick will work with John Doe. Then, Wu Ming and Hubrick walked down the exposed stairs and went underground. The laboratory-like scene entered Wu Ming's eyes. Chapter 422. Wu Ming saw a laboratory-like scene full of forest elves technology. There was a huge mainframe that looked like a human brain wrapped in purple glowing vines, as well as several giant pillars engraved with a large number of flashing purple tactics. There was also a screen-like display on the ground with a large number of forest elves' words reflected on it. The entire space was immersed in purple. Hint, this is likely to be the development site of the forest elves' new weapons, Hubrick said to Wu Ming as he looked at the giant pillar engraved with mysterious runes. Can't Hubrick understand these runes? Wu Ming asked. The runes of Canas are not in Hubrick's database. Hubrick shook his head. In this regard, Wu Ming did not show any disappointment. Wu Ming had almost guessed it. Walking forward and coming to the screen on the ground, Wu Ming infused it with magic power. The entire room lit up, and all the instruments began to operate. Seeing such a scene, Hubrick was puzzled. Puzzled, why can John Doe reactivate the instruments powered by elves? Hubrick, who followed Wu Ming, now knew that Wu Ming, who came from another world, did not have any elves in his body. Logically speaking, he should not be able to use the instruments of this world. Wu Ming smiled slightly at Hubrick's question. It's considered my own ability. In the beginning, after Wu Ming sensed that there was no magic power in this world, Wu Ming was indeed unable to use magic and spells that required magic power. However, the energy elves of this world were also products of the Big Root. Therefore, Wu Ming, who was of the same origin as the Big Root, could also be said to have the ability to use elves. It was not difficult for Wu Ming to use the elves floating in the atmosphere, but it was a little troublesome. After that, after Wu Ming adapted to the power system of this world and found that he could act as a sprite of this world through the magic power in his body, Wu Ming began to use the almost infinite magic power in his body. Well, this body didn't have unlimited mana. Although this body was created based on Wu Ming's original body, it couldn't imitate the characteristics of the root dragon. However, it had enough mana. To put it simply, the energy I possess can be of use to this world. It's that simple. Wu Ming stopped looking at Hubrick, who was nodding his head like he didn't understand. He started to study the host. On the large screen, countless words and a large number of unknown formulas appeared. Logically speaking, Wu Ming shouldn't be able to understand them, but now, Wu Ming was concentrating on reading. Wu Ming knew that this world was different from the world he was familiar with. Therefore, after getting familiar with Hubrick, Wu Ming asked Hubrick to teach Wu Ming the various languages of this world. Hubrick, who had a database, naturally knew most of the languages. In addition, Hubrick was now Wu Ming's main focus, so Hubrick easily taught Wu Ming all the languages he could teach. Wu Ming didn't disappoint Hubrick's teaching and quickly learned most of it. Therefore, Wu Ming could still understand the languages of ordinary races, such as the language of the forest elves on the screen. The Zeroth Void Blessing Theory Verification Experimental Furnace. Wu Ming read out the name of the experiment. Wu Ming couldn't even understand the name of the experiment personnel, let alone the name of the experiment. Ciphertext. Wu Ming could more or less guess why he couldn't understand it. After all, it was a new weapon experiment, so the experiment content should naturally use ciphertext. However, deciphering these ciphertexts was only a matter of time for the Kikai race Hubrick. Hubrick, come and help me. After hearing the call, Hubrick, who was still looking at the mysterious giant pillar, walked toward Wu Ming. And as if Hubrick's arrival had triggered some mechanism, the purple vine wrapped around the cortex prime instantly glowed, and countless light swords appeared out of thin air. A trap. A defensive tactic. Wu Ming looked at the light swords that were already flying toward the two of them. Wu Ming could sense that there were a large number of elves in these light swords, and they were likely to explode if they hit the target. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day, sinners shall be punished. Shatter their backs, dig out their tendons, bones, hair, and brains, and trample on their blood and mud. If I am one who cannot be approached by darkness, I will obey the words of the Lord and destroy thee. After reciting the words, a purplish-black fog appeared around Wu Ming's body. Wu Ming's heart needle pointed in the direction of 5:00, and the stone plate that represented annihilation lit up. The purplish-black fog instantly attacked the light swords, and in an instant, it was as if the purplish-black fog had devoured them. These light swords didn't even make a sound, let alone explode. Annihilation theoretically could devour and destroy everything, as long as Wu Ming knew how to use it. Immediately after, Wu Ming once again controlled the purplish-black fog to suddenly attack Huberic. Huberic looked at Wu Ming in confusion, but he didn't resist. Instantly, the cortex prime emitted light and touched the purplish-black fog that enveloped Huberic, but the purplish-black fog instantly eroded the light. As expected, the experimental furnace has been activated, Wu Ming said knowingly. Wu Ming stopped injecting magic power into the apparatus, and immediately after, the brain-like experimental furnace dimmed as if it had run out of energy. This was like a laptop. After taking advantage of the situation for a long time, the computer ran out of battery. Even if it was connected to a power source, if the power was immediately cut off, the computer would quickly run out of power. Are you okay, Huberic? Wu Ming removed the mist of annihilation and asked Huberic. Huberic shook his head. The reason Wu Ming had enveloped Huberic with the mist of annihilation was that Wu Ming had deduced that Huberic was likely to be attacked. This was the laboratory, and it was Huberic who had activated those defensive spell light swords when he approached, so Wu Ming believed that Huberic would definitely be attacked. Thus, he used the mist of annihilation to envelop Huberic. Sure enough, although the light just swept past Wu Ming, it seemed to only target Huberic. If one were to talk about the biggest difference between Wu Ming and Huberic, it would be the energy in their bodies. Wu Ming's energy was magic power, while Huberic's energy was elven, so Wu Ming guessed that this weapon was likely to be in existence that targeted elves as a mid-tier force. I've almost guessed the principle of this thing, but to fully understand it, I still need your decryption. Wu Ming stroked his chin and looked at the experimental furnace. Looking at the time, Rick should be here soon. I'll go meet him. You can stay here and help with the analysis. There's no danger anymore, Wu Ming said to Huberic. If it was just one person, Wu Ming could show himself. After all, he couldn't keep sending messages through the void. Understood, Huberic replied. Right. Wu Ming, who was walking toward the entrance, turned his head and looked at Huberic. I was protecting you just now. This is also a manifestation of the heart. After that, Wu Ming left the room, leaving behind Huberic, whose eyes were constantly revolving with data. Protect, the power of the heart. Chapter 423. Wu Ming left Huberic in the lab after confirming that there was no longer any danger. He then went out of the underground lab and arrived at the entrance of Melon City. As expected, Wu Ming found Rick already there. Rick found a safe place to hide his mount and then began to explore the old city. Although it was called an exploration, in reality, the houses here had basically collapsed. Rick had come this time hoping for a fluke. Even if it was an abandoned old city, it was still the old city of the forest elves. It was unlikely that they would leave anything behind. At this time, Rick also discovered that these places were destroyed by humans. This kind of destructive power doesn't seem like it's from the goblins. Sky wings, Rick judged. It had to be said that as the leader of the humans, Rick had mastered a lot of abilities. Strong vigilance, extremely calm mentality, disguise, deceit, numbing oneself, and the cruelty of sacrificing the small to save the big, as well as the characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and abilities of each race. Although it was not comprehensive, Rick had collected most of it. Rick did not have any extraordinary talents or abilities, but as a leader who led the other humans to live in this annoying era, these were all necessary. If he did not master these, he would not be able to survive. Simply put, he was forced. No one was willing to be born to deceive and suspect others, and Rick was the same. And the reason why Wu Ming knew this was because Wu Ming had seen it the last time they met. From the beginning, when Rick, Ivan, and Wu Ming came on the Goblin's fallen magic airship to saving Ivan and leaving after talking to the three of them, Rick's performance as the leader was seen by Wu Ming. Wu Ming could only say that Rick was not the best leader, but Rick was the most suitable leader to lead the other humans in this era. After Rick checked the buildings that were not intact, he quickly searched for any strange places. Soon, he discovered the sea of flowers and the underground passage that had been opened. Someone has been here. Could it be the forest elves? Rick was shocked. After all, under such circumstances, it was unlikely. No, it was impossible for humans to come here. Compared to other races, it was very likely that the forest elves would return to retrieve the materials that they did not manage to take away in time. Don't worry, there are no forest elite species coming. Suddenly, a young man's voice was heard. Rick immediately pulled out the dagger at his waist and turned towards the source of the sound. Rick saw a man wearing a black cloak with a hood. The fat cloak covered the man's entire body, and his hands were hidden in the cloak. Even his body was not exposed. Rick could only vaguely see the man's heels at the bottom of the cloak that was about to touch the ground. The wide hood basically covered the person's face. His hair, eyes, nose, and other body parts could not be seen. The only things that could be seen were his mouth, chin, and the voice just now. It was impossible to tell what race he was from. However, Rick's attire was similar to his opponent's. He wore a hooded cloak that covered half of his body, a pair of thick goggles that covered his eyes, and a scarf-like cloth that covered his mouth. Only his calves and hands were exposed, and Rick held a dagger that shone with a cold light in his hand. Who are you? Rick's previous panic seemed to be fake. He instantly adjusted himself and coldly asked the person who had come. Rick did not notice the man's arrival. If the man did not speak, Rick would not even know that there was someone behind him. To be more specific, the man in front of Rick gave him a sense of illusion. If he did not see him with his eyes, it was as if the man did not exist. There was no breath at all. The man was, of course, Wu Ming, who cast a lot of shielding magic on himself. There was no breath because of the effect of magic. Why don't you recognize me? Then, how about this? When Wu Ming said the last three words, he used magic to change his voice. His voice immediately became the voice that Rick was familiar with. He had seen him a few days ago. The god from the other world. Rick was shocked at first, but then he calmed down and put the dagger back into the scabbard at his waist. Why? Are you not afraid that I will hurt you? Wu Ming said to Rick with his original voice. There is no need for that. According to the rules of this world, you are a type of god. Even the weakest type of god is not something that a mere human can deal with, Rick continued after a pause. Moreover, even if you are a member of any other race, you are stronger than humans in terms of fighting. If you want to kill me, I will not be able to stop you. What Rick meant was that no matter who the man was, he could not defeat or defend against his attacks. Moreover, the man would not kill him, so there was no need for him to defend himself. Moreover, you actually want to help humans, Lord God from the other world. Rick took off the blindfold, the cloth that acted as a mask, and the hood, and looked at Wu Ming. Oh. Why do you think so? Is it because I said that I am a god that protects humans in my world? Wu Ming asked. However, Rick shook his head without hesitation. Of course not. I am not stupid enough to believe the words of an unknown person. Rick showed a proud expression. However, you still made a bet with me, who is unknown and has insufficient information. Wu Ming's words were like a sharp knife that pierced Rick's heart. Rick stood there awkwardly. I promised you to protect Ivan and all. It was an expedient measure, ahahaha. Rick touched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. However, there is no reason to reject a bet between men. Am I right, Lord God? But in an instant, Rick regained his cold expression. In fact, even if Rick did not say it, Wu Ming understood. For someone like Rick, how could he not understand the meaning of Wu Ming's words? Whether it was Wu Ming saving Ivan, or the conversation with Rick, Rick felt the goodwill of Wu Ming. However, as Rick said, how could he easily believe the words of an unknown person? Let's assume that if Wu Ming was planning to deceive Rick and others, then as long as they followed Wu Ming's intentions, they would be fine. And if Rick did not bet with Wu Ming, then it was likely that Wu Ming, who wanted to deceive Rick and others, would be angry. If he could not achieve his goal, these humans would be useless. Then Wu Ming, an unknown person, would likely have this idea to directly eliminate Rick and others. Therefore, Rick chose to bet with him. As if knowing that Wu Ming already knew his thoughts, Ricker went on to say. In fact, there is a more important reason why I bet with you, and that is the content of the bet, the possibility of humans. Chapter 424. The possibility of humans was an extremely vague statement. The definition of possibility referred to the probability of something happening. It was a quantitative indicator that predicted the development of something. It was an objective proof, not a subjective proof. But the possibility of humans, which aspect did it refer to, or all of them? One had to know that the more confusing the contents of the bet, the higher the chance of winning. The question of the possibility of humans had many meanings, but both Wu Ming and Rick had the same idea. You want to bet on the future of humans, right, Lord God? Rick stared at Wu Ming. I don't know if you didn't want to hide it or purposely revealed it, but your intentions are too obvious. It's so obvious that even I want to suspect you. Rick smiled as if he was talking to an old friend that he hadn't seen in years. But, you still made the bet with me, didn't you? Wu Ming said directly. Ah, you're right. Rick closed his eyes. No matter how suspicious Wu Ming was, no matter how dangerous Wu Ming was, no matter how numb Rick was, no matter how scared Rick was, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Humans that are not valued, humans that are ignored by other races, humans without power. I really want to see their expressions of anger after their plans are ruined by humans. Ha ha ha. Rick seemed to have thought of something happy as he laughed happily. Rick didn't know how to end this war, and he didn't have the power to end this war. But collecting information and waiting for an opportunity to come was the way of the weak. And Wu Ming was one of the opportunities. Because of Wu Ming's bet, Rick woke up from his numbness of, let humans live. Just because he was weak, he couldn't interfere with the strong. Stop joking. Even if I'm weak, I want to prove to you the possibility of humans. Rick stopped laughing and looked at Wu Ming with fighting spirit. Clap clap clap, Wu Ming clapped his hands. You've really impressed me, Rick. Seeing that the leader of humans had such fighting spirit, Wu Ming felt that there was hope to change the world. Then, let me tell you how to end this war. Wu Ming took off his hood and looked at him. Now, humans had grasped the future. Because the god spirits were not satisfied with being on the same level as other gods, the gods began to fight with other gods. Countless races created by the gods also began to fight with the gods. The Elven Corridor had answered the wishes of the gods to make this planet the place where they were born. Thus, something called the Celestial Cup appeared. Star Cup? Rick asked doubtfully. Rick and Wu Ming walked down the stairs of the underground laboratory. Wu Ming explained the story. Ah, that's right. It's the Star Cup. Wuming narrowed his eyes and continued to explain. Only when the gods of this planet decided on the strongest person would the star cup appear from the elven corridor underground. The strongest person who obtained the star cup would become the only god. In other words, these thousands of years of war were actually because of the selfish desires of the gods. Rick fell silent. Because of the selfish desires of the strong, human families were destroyed. They were not valued and were trampled on. They were even treated as food, test subjects, and laborers. I don't think I'll forgive those people. Rick shouted slightly crazily. He hammered the steel wall beside him with one hand. Traces of blood flowed from Rick's hand that he did not remove from the wall. Wuming cast a few healing Lune runes and Rick's hand was healed. This is the law of the jungle. The strong decide everything, and the weak can only accept it, Wuming said calmly. And often, the weak that the strong do not pay attention to will be killed. There were countless examples of the weak defeating the strong. Therefore, Wuming would not underestimate anyone. Even if he looked down on them, he would take them seriously in his heart. By the way, aren't you afraid that I'll think that you want to use us humans to help you obtain the star cup by telling me all this? Rick looked at Wuming. However, Wuming just shook his head calmly. There's no need for that, Wuming said calmly. Firstly, I'm a god from another world. Whether I can use the star cup of this world or whether I have the right to obtain it is still unknown. Secondly, I'm very strong, Wuming said as he looked into Rick's eyes. Perhaps you might think that I'm a little arrogant, but according to the information I've obtained, in this world, in terms of combat power, only the creator of the Skywing race, Arthas, who is known as the god of war, can fight me. Wuming's words shocked Rick. Rick had some understanding of Arthas. The god who created the Skywing race was said to have the strongest power among all the gods. He was the strongest god of war who had killed other gods with the god-slaying weapon he created. Hey! Are you for real? Are you that strong? Rick looked at Wuming with an extremely shocked gaze. Although Rick also knew that Wuming was not weak and was very likely a powerful god, he could not help but be shocked that Wuming could fight with Arthas, the creator of the god-slaying weapon. Then I'm really sorry. I'm that strong. Wuming half-jokingly shrugged helplessly and continued to walk down the stairs to the basement. The reason why Wuming said that was because of Wuming's speculation. Back then, Wuming had asked the dragon spirit what rank it was in this world. The dragon spirit half-weakly said that it was almost on par with the strongest god, Arthas. Of course, Wuming did not easily believe the one-sided words of the dragon spirit. After that, Wuming asked for some other information, such as the strength of the dragon spirit and the strength of the Kikai race. After becoming familiar with Hublitus, Wuming also asked Hublitus about it. The database shows that the dragon spirit doesn't lie. They are a race that purely respects the strong. This was Hublitus's original words. Speaking of which, Hublitus also told Wuming some information about the dragon spirit. It could use its past and future power in the present, manipulate time and space, and transfer injuries to the past or future. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to deal with. The dragon spirit whose bones were broken by Wuming's punch was defeated because it underestimated the enemy and fought head-on with Wuming's giant incarnation. The reason why the dragon spirit did not transfer its injuries to the past or future was actually because of the law of the jungle. However, Wuming always felt that the other party was afraid that he would punch him again, so he gave in. Thinking about it, if the dragon spirit seed got up again, with the situation at that time, Wuming was likely to give the dragon spirit seed another punch. Not everyone could block a phoenix and a giant. In short, Wuming inferred from the information that only Arthas could match him. Let's not talk about this for now. We found something good down here. Let's take a look together. With that, Wuming walked away. You guys. Rick muttered this word. Does he have companions? Rick shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He followed Wu Ming's footsteps and came to the laboratory. Chapter 425. This is. Rieker looked at the scene in the underground laboratory and said in shock. It wasn't that Rieker was excited when he saw the scene in the underground laboratory, but because of the current state of Zayubrik. As everyone knew, Zayubrik was a Mekikai species and could continuously evolve. The Mekikai species evolved from the 5 small square boxes. And now, Zayubrik's appearance just happened to prove the theory of evolution. Zayubrik's petite body floated in the spacious laboratory. Countless cable-like data lines appeared from the body behind Zayubrik's hair, connecting to the brain-like mainframe in the laboratory. Several large screens appeared in front of Zayubrik. Data flowed on them, all of which were data that Wu Ming and Rieker couldn't understand. There was no doubt that Zayubrik was analyzing the content of the Zeroth protection of the void. These cables and other things were actually evolved. According to what Zayubrik told Wu Ming, if Zayubrik was completely liberated, he could rely on himself to form a high-tech attack spaceship like a battleship. According to Zayubrik, those were all evolved. Although Wu Ming was very curious about how Zayubrik's body contained so many things, he could almost guess that it was nothing more than an independent space like Wu Ming's golden ripples. Kikai species. What's going on? Rieker looked at Wu Ming in confusion. It wasn't that Rieker suspected that this was Wu Ming's conspiracy or anything else, but he was suspicious of the Kikai species that had appeared at the moment. After all, the Kikai species all acted in groups, and their neural networks were all connected to each other. It felt awkward as if everyone shared the same brain. However, it was precisely because of this that making an enemy of a Kikai species was making an enemy of an entire race of Kikai species because their neural networks were all connected. This was also why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. In addition to the other party's replication power, this was also the reason why other races ordered not to provoke the Kikai species. If you accidentally provoked a Mekai seed, countless Mekai seeds would immediately come looking for you. They didn't care about anything else. If you provoked them, they would retaliate. They would attack you without a second thought. Although a single Kikai species was not considered strong, this kind of species that was particularly united and acted in groups were the most difficult to deal with. Rick's mind began to wander after seeing the Mekikai seed. Don't worry. It's not what you think, Wu Ming said. Naturally, he could tell what Rick was thinking. Fear was written all over his face. Hoblitis is a Kikai species that I captured. After I captured it, the mainframe that it was connected to cut off its connection with Hoblitis and issued a self-destruct mission, but I stopped it. So, there are no other species around this abandoned city except for the 3 of us. It had to be said that the Kikai race was a very rational race. They would not hesitate to give up when it was time to give up. When the captured party received the order to self-destruct, they would self-destruct. They were so rational that it was scary. However, I really can't compliment a Kikai species that was captured by you and can still listen to you. Did you use some kind of magic or something? No one would believe that a highly rational and team-oriented Kikai species would be captured by someone else. However, this was the truth. Kikai species are also creatures. As long as they can communicate and have self-awareness, it's not difficult to get along with them, Wu Ming said to Rick as he looked at Hoblitis, who was floating in the air. Actually, Wu Ming had other reasons for being able to get Hoblitis to use his words so smoothly. Wu Ming felt that Hoblitis might have started thinking long ago and had a hazy feeling about the heart in his heart. After that, Wu Ming added fuel to the fire, and Hoblitis and Wu Ming acted together. Wu Ming believed that even without his arrival and without Wu Ming's guidance to Hoblitis, Hoblitis could still obtain the heart through his own release. Wu Ming had such a premonition. After that, Wu Ming and Rick did not disturb Hoblitis's analysis of the data. They just waited quietly and chatted with each other. Wu Ming told Rick the story of how he waited for him when he was a Hyunryong in the Uruk. The fact that humans were the first species and could use magic, especially peace, deeply attracted Rick. Your world is really interesting. If it's possible, I really want to go to the Uruk you mentioned to have a look. I still don't know what to hand over. Rick smiled awkwardly. Only now did Rick realize that he did not know Wu Ming's name. In their previous communication, Rick had directly called Wu Ming Lord God. My name. Lord God passing by, you can just call me Nameless. As a god who doesn't belong to this world, there's no need to remember it. Wu Ming gave a discount and laughed it off. Well, forget it. I'll continue to call you Lord God, Rick said embarrassedly. Rick also saw that Wu Ming did not want to say his name. Since the other party did not want to tell him, then he would not ask. At this moment, Hublitus's state changed. Hublitus, who was floating in the air, opened his yellow eyes that were like warning lines. At the same time, Hublitus put away all the cables connected to the laboratory's mainframe. Reporting, Nameless, I have analyzed the information of the Zeroth protection of the void. Hublitus landed in front of Wu Ming and said lightly. Zeroth protection of the void. This made Rick puzzled. He did not understand the meaning of this term at all. This is what I want to tell you, Rick. Wu Ming looked deeply at Rick. A moment later, Hublitus projected the information of the Zeroth protection of the void on the wall. This information, which was extremely precious to other foot therapists, was all exposed to Wu Ming and Rick. The Zeroth protection of the void was a new weapon tactic completed by other forest elves with the tactic power provided by the creator of the forest elves, forest god Canis. It was a weapon specifically targeted at Arthu and his kin, the skywing species. However, although it was a weapon targeted at the skywing species and Arthu, it was not that it could not be used against other races. The principle was simply to let the elves in the fantasy breed's body, which was a high-level, life form, self-destruct, allowing them to erupt with tremendous power to deal great damage to the enemy. The various races were not equal. In terms of the elves' adaptability, they were divided into a life form and living form. Powerful races such as god breeds, fantasy breeds, dragon elves, giant breeds, and skywing species were called life form, while the other races were called living form. In fact, to put it simply, the life form race was a powerful race with different natures from the living form race, while the living form race was a race weaker than the life form race. This is actually a weapon targeted at Arthu, Rick said in slight shock. Chapter 426. Through the self-destruction of a fantasy breed sprite, it can be used to attack Arthu and his skywing breeds. Its power is enough to destroy the divine marrow of a god. It's practically a weapon of the same nature as the gnome breed's marrow explosion. Rick said seriously. It was worth mentioning that the marrow explosion was information that Rick had found from the gnome's crashed magic airship. The abandoned city of the forest elves was also found from the same magic airship. The Zeroth ward of the void that Zayubrik had analyzed clearly showed that the power of this tactic could destroy the divine marrow of a god. However, he scoffed at this. If only it were that easy. At the very least, it would have to catch a god off guard and hit it. To explain, the divine marrow was actually the spirit core of a servant. The forest elves actually managed to research such a tactic without anyone noticing. As expected of the race that is best at using magic tactics, Rick said indifferently. It was unknown whether he was mocking or praising. Hint, the forest elves and fairy breeds once formed an alliance and researched a tactic to control the superior life forms. In the end, the skywing breeds were extremely dissatisfied, and the fairy breed city was directly destroyed. In the end, the research on the tactic to control the superior life forms failed. After all, it made sense to be able to control those superior races who thought highly of themselves. Once the forest elves and fairy elves successfully researched them, whether it was the superior races or other biological races, none of them would agree. One was that they were unwilling to be controlled. How dare mere forest elves control them? The skywing breeds with the most explosive and belligerent tempers would be the first to disagree. The other was fear. If the research was really successful, the forest elves and the superior life forms who were already watching and controlling them would be the end of the world for the other races. After all, the superior life forms were really strong. If they formed an alliance, the other life forms would definitely not be able to survive. Therefore, the matter of the forest elves and fairy breeds' research on controlling the superior life forms was discovered by the spies of the other races and spread among the other races. The fairy breeds had withdrawn from the war because their vitality had been greatly damaged by the skywing breeds. Their capital was gone, and the skywing breeds were still attacking. If they did not run, they would be waiting for death. Therefore, the fairies withdrew from the war and went into hiding. Wu-Ming, on the other hand, felt that it should be the races that withdrew from the war and went into hiding because their gods were gone. In order to create their own Lord God, they had to fight. If they found out that their Lord God had been killed by the enemy Lord God, then what was the point of fighting? In short, according to Wu-Ming's research and analysis, the forest elves did not seem to have used this weapon on the battlefield because there were no records. It was the same for the goblins' marrow explosion. The forest goblins and goblins were most likely using these newly researched weapons as their secret trump cards, preparing to use them when they least expected it. Then, this Void Ward Zeroth might very well be a modified version of the forest elves' failed research on controlling superior life forms, Wu-Ming said. Then, Zeublus nodded and shook his head. Answer. The possibility of this conjecture is very high, but we don't have any specific information, so we can't come to a conclusion. No matter what, this is an extremely dangerous tactic, right? Rick asked. Zeublus nodded faintly. This is an important piece of information, Rick. Wu-Ming smiled. Rick fell into deep thought. Since he could remember, humans had been hiding from place to place until his hometown was affected by the war. He was lucky not to die, and he searched for more humans. Everyone worked hard to survive. However, Rick slowly grew up and continued to work hard. However, Rick did not know what was going on. He worked hard and became the leader of humans. Since he became the leader, he had the obligation to protect humans. He would let them live. Rick, who thought so, gradually became numb after seeing the cruelty of reality. Again and again, he ordered those who looked at him with a smile to die. However, Rick kept comforting himself that this was to let more people live. This was for the greater good. However, in order to allow more of the 1001 people to live, sacrificing fewer 999 people, was that really for the greater good? Rick knew that this was another level of hypocrisy. Rick was numb. He was irritated, cried, gave up on himself, and even wanted to commit suicide. In this world, death was an escape, but he thought of the other people who were alive. They needed him as a leader, and it had been like this until today. In the past, people were constantly migrating. When they were affected, they quickly moved to a safe place and set up camp. However, in the face of the powerful tactics and weapons developed by the forest elves and gnomes, if the battlefield was near human life, then could humans still survive? They might not even have time to escape. However, there was no safe place in this world. The only safe place was the underworld. However, even if the soul came to the underworld, the dead body would still not be at peace in the human world. It would still be destroyed by the war that was comparable to a natural disaster. If this continued, next time, not only himself, but also his sister, Ivan, Ole, and everyone who was saved by Lord God, would die. Rick stopped thinking. Hey, Lord God, can you end this war? Rick lowered his head slightly. His bangs covered his eyes, making it difficult for others to see clearly. Rick had already given up. Even if Wu-Ming really wanted something, as long as Wu-Ming could end the war, he would do anything. I can. Wu-ming responded to Rick's expectations and said casually. The condition for ending the war is to decide the strongest person. Then I just need to kill all the other gods, and the war will naturally end. Wu-ming said coldly. With my current state, in a few days, I will be able to kill all the other gods. Wu-ming raised his fist and showed a tyrannical smile. But, is this really okay, Rick? Wu-ming said calmly. I have always thought that the war in this world can only be ended by the most insignificant power in this world. This is what I believe in. Although Wu-ming's purpose in coming to this world was to save humans, if he could see humans save themselves, then the humans in this world would not be destroyed. They would definitely be able to survive until the end. Rick was silent. He also wanted to end the war with his own hands, but he did not have the power to do so. Not to mention the gods, even the weaker demons and sea dwellers among the other races could not be defeated by humans. As if he had seen through Rick's thoughts, Wu-ming smiled and then said. Then, Rick, let me tell you something. Defeating the other gods is not the only way to make the star cup appear. Rick raised his head when he heard that. Chapter 427. Riker raised his head and looked at Wu-ming. After a few seconds, Riker understood. Wu-ming had said before that the star cup was formed when the strongest person appeared. The elf corridor bred various gods, so it was inferred that the elf corridor was the strongest person. In that case, the representative would explode and the elf corridor would appear. With the appearance of the strongest person, the star cup would definitely appear. When the time comes, I will go and meet the god of war Artesius. As for you, you will be responsible for piercing the core of this planet and revealing the elf corridor. When the star cup appears, you will obtain the star cup. This way, the battle for the soul god on this planet will end. Wu-ming spoke Riker's mind and pointed out that Riker should obtain the star cup. Hey! Wait a minute, why me? As a god, isn't it better for you to obtain the star cup? Riker said with some surprise. In fact, until now, Riker had not completely believed in Wu-ming. He really wanted to end this war, so even if the god in front of him wanted to become the soul god, Riker had no objections. Then I'm sorry, I have no intention of becoming the soul god of this planet. Wu-ming shrugged his shoulders with a half smile and half helplessly. This world was not one he was familiar with. It could be said that except for Riker and Zayubrik, Wu-ming did not know anyone else. To become the soul god of this planet, there was no doubt that he would have to live and die with the planet. Wu-ming did not have the time for that. Although Wu-ming was benevolent, he was not a saint. It was impossible for him to spend too much effort on this world. There were other worlds that needed Wu-ming's help more. Perhaps Wu-ming would come back to visit in the future, but he would definitely not become the sole god and ruler of this planet. In addition, I still have to fight 2 rounds with Artesius. Otherwise, if the strongest god of war snatches the star cup, it will be troublesome, Wu-ming said seriously. And the main reason why I'm not going to get the star cup is that I'm not a native of this world, so it's very likely that I won't be able to hold the star cup. It's better to leave it to you. Wu-ming patted Rick's shoulder. Rick was silent for a moment before he nodded. Yes. Leave it to me. Wu-ming and Rick smiled at each other, their eyes filled with hope. This made Hubert Lutz tilt his head and look at the two strangely. Yes, but the power of humans alone is unable to penetrate the core and reveal the elven corridor, Zayubrik said expressionlessly. In truth, it was not just humans. Even other races, such as the dragon spirits and the sky wings, would barely be able to pierce through the earth's core with their own strength. No, it would be impossible for them to do so. Meanwhile, the forest goblin's Zeroth protection of the void and the goblin's marrow explosion relied on magic spells and magical technological products. They didn't need to pierce through the earth's core. Unless there was the help of a god. However, if the dragon spirit races collapsing whistle, the skywing races sky strike, the forest spirit races zeroth void barrier, the goblin races marrow explosion, and other sure kill abilities of the various races were combined, and with the help of the gods, the Earth's core could be easily opened. But at that time, the planet would be almost finished. However, as long as one became the only god, they would immediately activate their authority to restore the planet. Then, there would be no problem. Wuming thought so from the beginning, and Rick also thought of this after knowing about the marrow explosion and the zeroth protection of the void. At that time, I'll help you with the matter of correcting the attacks. I'll definitely make those combined attacks hit the target. Wuming showed an expression of victory. I'll leave the rest to you, Rick. I'll obediently wait for your victory on the corpse of a god. Wuming squatted down and patted Huberic's head. Then, he turned to Rick and said, "Don't worry. If it's you, it should be possible," Wuming teased. Facing Wuming's distrustful question, Rick smiled. "Leave it to me. I'll end this game." Now, Rick showed an unprecedented smile. This was a smile from the bottom of his heart. By the way, Rick, I have something to ask of you," Wuming suddenly said. "What's the matter?" Rick looked at Wuming in confusion. "This child and I want to enter the life of you humans and experience life. Allow me to refuse." Before we finished, Rick interrupted Wuming's words. How can you do it so neatly?" Wuming smiled. Rick looked at Wuming with melancholy, then looked at Hubert, who was a Kikai race. "If it's you, Lord God, there's no problem." After all, Wuming's appearance looked like a human, and his speech and behavior were consistent with a human's. But Hubela's was. Rick looked at Hubert helplessly. Hubert tilted his head and looked at Rick in confusion. Hidden under the cloak is a mechanical body, stiff and lifeless, and a mechanical tone. Without a doubt, she is a Kikai race. Even if she disguises herself, once she enters the life of us humans, she will be easily exposed. You know how afraid humans are of other races in this era. If we don't chase her away, we won't be able to live a normal life. I clearly understood what Rick meant. Actually, Hubert had to disguise herself as an ordinary human girl, and no one could find out. After entering the human society, Hubert was destined to have more contact with people. This way, it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. In other words, it's fine as long as no one finds out, right? Wuming smiled. Well, that's what you say, but I don't think that a Kikai race can hide her identity. Rick touched his chin and looked at the items on Hubert's body. Data flowed through his eyes, a glowing disc on his right forehead that looked like a magic formation, a pair of wings on his back, and two tail-like threads near his tailbone that connected to the sprites. A Kikai race without a sprite was like a car without gasoline. It was useless. Then, what about now? Wuming smiled. Then, through the hand on Hubert's head, Wuming transferred his magic power to Hubert's body, or rather, the art on Hubert's body. In an instant, Hubert's body lit up. It was so bright that Rick couldn't open his eyes. When the light gradually dissipated, Rick opened his eyes. Rick looked at the little girl standing beside Wuming in shock. Rose-colored hair, tattered clothes, no wings, no tail, no disc on her forehead, and with those big watery amber eyes, she was simply adorable. This should be fine, right? Wuming looked at Rick with a smile. If that's the case, yes. I guess. Rick smiled awkwardly. Then, let's play a game. Wuming smiled. Chapter 428. Checkmate. Zeyuberic said calmly. She picked up the chess piece created by Wuming's magic and killed Rick directly. It's cheating to let Jikai Seed play chess. Rick sighed helplessly as he looked at his chess piece that couldn't be more dead. This is a fair game. You have to abide by the rules, Rick, Wooming, who was sitting on the side and watching the game in boredom, said with a gloating smile. Damn it. You actually let Jikai Seed play chess with me. There should be a limit to cheating. Rick muttered helplessly. Okay, didn't you agree to it before? If Sayubrik wins, let her join the lives of humans. You have to accept your loss, Rick. You have to accept your loss, Sayubrik also said expressionlessly. That's right. Rick was excited because he saw chess that he hadn't seen for a long time. Then, he agreed to the game and lost completely. After all, how could a human brain compare to a machine? Of course, there were exceptions, but this exception wasn't Rick. Yes. I know. I'll let Sayubrik join our lives. You said before that you wanted to join us. Then, I'll have to trouble you to look after her. Don't let her cause any trouble, Rick said helplessly. Through the exchange just now, Rick also knew the name of this Jikai seed. I'll try my best. Wooming looked at Rick with a smile and said irresponsible words. Sigh. Rick sighed helplessly. These two guys were indeed non-humans. If they turned into humans, they would definitely be problem children. That's right, Rick suddenly said. The name Sayubrik doesn't sound like a human's. And this tone. If you don't change it, it might leave suspicion in the crowd, Rick said earnestly. In this kind of era, not only was Rick suspicious, but the other ordinary people were also suspicious. If they saw something, the refugees would be in a panic. Rick believed in Wooming and also believed in Sayubrik, who was captured by Wooming, but this didn't mean that others could believe them. So, if it was possible, can you get Hublets to change it? Asked Leave. Are you all right, Hubrik? Wooming patted Hubrik's little head, looking at him. Answer, there's no problem. Sayubrik felt Wooming's head patting and was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Then, first, remove the mechanical word at the beginning of the sentence, and then change the character to be timid and quiet. Is that okay? Wooming asked softly. Hubert nodded and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Hubrik opened his eyes again. Is this okay? When Sayubrik spoke again, it wasn't the same emotionless voice as before. Instead, it was the timid voice of a human girl that was mixed with cuteness. With Wooming's magic, Sayubrik was no different from an ordinary, timid human girl. Well done, Sayubrik. Wooming gently patted Sayubrik's head as if he was facing his own sister. As for the name, you'll be called Shiobi from now on, and I'll be your brother, Villo. Remember that. Wooming treated Shiobi gently as if he had really become a brother. Shiobi. Remember, Rick raised his eyebrows as he looked at the two people who were acting like crazy. Until now, I still feel that you superior races really have too much of an advantage. Rick said in confusion. However, Wooming understood. Wasn't Rick referring to the series of tricks that Wooming and Sayubrik had used? Although humans are weak, the spirit that they possess is something that non-human races like us can't compare to. I think that as the leader of the humans, you must also understand this principle. Wooming's words made Rick laugh. Well, that's true. Then, it's almost time for us to go back. With that, Rick began to walk towards the stairs. Rick, I have some unfortunate news for you. Wooming suddenly called out to Rick. Huh? Rick stopped and turned around to look at Wooming in confusion. What is it? The weather outside is a little bad. Wooming revealed a mischievous smile. In the outside world, countless elven skeletons were like a snowstorm, wreaking havoc on the earth. Suddenly, a shadow flew out from the snowstorm. They were Rick, who was fully armed and riding the creature, and Shiobi, who was flying at full speed with Rick and the creature in his hands. Wah! Rick's scream was heard. About a few minutes later, Shiobi stopped and put the half-dead Rick and the equally half-dead creature on the ground. "We're here," Shiobi said softly. I can't take it anymore." Rick weakly lay on the ground and said faintly. The creature had already fainted. Suddenly, a black door like a black hole appeared, and Wu Ming's figure appeared from inside. "Yo, Rick, are you okay?" Wu Ming looked at Rick lying on the ground with a mischievous smile and greeted him. Damn it. With such a convenient method, why did you let me fly back while being carried by Shiobi?" Rick raised his hand and asked. "Teleportation door, because this door only allows me to pass through, so there's no other way," Wu Ming said with a smile. Of course, this statement was wrong. He simply wanted to see Rick suffer to satisfy his own mischievous interest. When Wu Ming, Shiobi, and Rick were preparing to leave the underground laboratory of the forest elves, Wu Ming discovered the situation outside in advance. According to Rick, it was a death ash storm. As mentioned before, the elven skeletons were like rain and snow when the weather changed, so it wasn't impossible for a situation similar to a blizzard to occur. Although Wu Ming used the excuse of, "with my defensive tactic, there's no need to worry at all," to let Shiobi directly carry Rick and his horse back here. It had to be said that the horse was coincidentally hidden by Rick and was able to avoid the death ash storm. It should be known that ordinary humans would be completely corroded in a few seconds under such a death ash storm. The elven skeletons were just that terrifying. Speaking of which, your tactic is quite useful. Rick checked his divine body and was really fine. Not only that, but his horse was also fine. Shiobi, too. Shiobi also looked at her own body and was completely unharmed. By the way, although Shiobi was not afraid of the death ash storm, the elven skeletons could still cause surface abrasion to Shiobi. Hence, Wu Ming had also set up a tactic for her. "Let's go back to the village first. Rick needs to rest well." Wu Ming looked again at Rick, who was dizzy from the high-speed movement. "You bastard! You think it's caused by me?" Rick roared angrily. "It's Shiobi." Wu Ming pointed at Shiobi shamelessly. It's Shiobi." Shiobi nodded. In principle, Shiobi did indeed cause Rick to feel dizzy. "I really lose to you guys." Chapter 429. Because Shiobi knew that they had to come directly to the cave that led to the village, Rick led the half-dead horse and led Wu Ming and Shiobi into the cave. Along the way, Rick kept reminding Wu Ming and Shiobi. "Remember, don't say anything unnecessary and make everyone suspicious. Also, Vero, you have to keep an eye on Shiobi and don't let her go berserk. Also, if people greet you, you have to answer them politely. Rick, I seriously suspect that you think I'm an ignorant god." Wu Ming complained helplessly. Cough cough, I'm just worried." "Ah." Rick laughed awkwardly. "You're indeed not an ignorant god. You're a problematic god." Immediately after, Rick stopped. Wu Ming and Shiobi, who were following behind Rick, also stopped. There was an old door in front of them. The large underground cave behind the door was Rick's village. Wu Ming had already noticed that when he was observing. "Then, let's go, Villo, Shiobi." With that said, Rick pushed open the old wooden door. Creak, following the sound of the old wooden door, the cave appeared in front of Wu Ming and Shiobi. "Rick!" It was still the voice that Wu Ming heard before. The woman named Crone, Rick's sister, threw herself into Rick's arms. She hugged Rick tightly and called out Rick's name worriedly. Okay, Crone. I'm fine." Rick comforted his sister in a fluster. Because he went out alone and there was no one else to look after him, she was even more worried. Wu Ming saw that Crone was unusually worried this time. She was even more worried than last time. The others only looked at Rick and Shiobi from their posts. However, they were more curious about Wu Ming and Xiubi. I told you to call me sister. Who are the two behind you? At this time, Crone noticed the two people behind Rick. Them. I met the wanderers on my way back. Their village was destroyed, so I brought them back. Following Rick's words, Wu Ming took off his brown hood and smiled at Crone. Hello, my name is Vilo Solansword. This is my sister, Xiubi Solansword. Nice to meet you. By the way, because the neat black cloak looked too flashy, Wu Ming purposely changed his and Xiubi's cloaks to a refugee cloak. Brother and sister. That's great, Crone said enviously when she saw how dependent Xiubi was on her brother. Then, Xiubi opened her mouth. Please advise me. While she was at it, Xiubi pulled down her hood that appeared extremely large due to her figure and hid behind Wu Ming. Then, she was adorable to Crone. Whoa! What's wrong with this child? She's too cute. Crone hugged Xiubi and rubbed against her. This caused Rick to be shocked. Wu Ming cast a camouflage spell that could only change Xiubi's appearance in human eyes. In other words, her body did not change. But fortunately, Xiubi's body was based on human standards. In addition, Xiubi was instructed by Wu Ming to put away the mechanical objects, such as wings and the rings on her head. Therefore, there was no need to worry about being discovered. Xiubi could not understand Crone's actions. Seeing that Wu Ming did not give any instructions, she just let Crone hug her. As for Crone, she treated Xiubi as a shy child and didn't pay much attention to him. Then, Crone, it's about time to prepare a room for Vilo and the others, Rick said nervously. He was afraid that the Kikai seed would treat Crone's actions as an enemy's attack and counterattack. To put it bluntly, Rick was still worried about Xiubi's Kikai seed. He allowed Xiubi to join because of Wu Ming. Otherwise, why would Rick allow a Kikai seed to join his village for a mere game? However, Rick had forgotten one thing. If it wasn't for Silent Sound, Xiubi might have threatened Rick. Then, if Rick didn't agree, she would have played a game with him to determine the winner. The outcome wouldn't have changed. You're right. It's almost night. If we don't hurry, Vilo and Xiubi won't have a place to sleep. Then, Crone quickly let go of Xiubi and prepared to help Wu Ming and Xiubi tidy up the room. Crone, I have a storage room next door. There's a bed too. Tidy it up a little and you can let them use it, Rick suddenly said. Can we? If that's the case, where do we put the collected information? Crone asked. It seems that storage room isn't an ordinary storage room. It should store the information that Rick has been collecting. Wu Ming thought. Put the information in my room. I need to study it today. As if he thought of something, Rick revealed a smile full of fighting spirit. Rick. Crone was stunned when she saw Rick's smile. She hadn't seen Rick smile in a long time. What's wrong? Seeing Crone stunned, Rick stopped smiling and looked at Crone in confusion. Then, Crone walked up to Rick step by step. She reached out her hands and touched Rick's face. Then, she squeezed hard. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rick was shocked by Crone's sudden attack. His own sister's attack on his face was not a normal kind of pain. Speak. Are you someone pretending to be Rick? Give me back my brother. Crone stared at Rick mockingly. How could Rick not know that this was his sister's sudden prank? I admit defeat, sister. Rick put his hands together and begged for mercy. Humph, humph, humph. Not enough. As she spoke, Crone increased her strength. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Vilo, help. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had his arms crossed in front of his chest as he watched the farce between the siblings with great interest. A few minutes later, in Rick's room. The originally tidy room was now filled with all kinds of scrolls of information, filling the room to the brim. This was the stuff that Crone moved from next door. She was still cleaning the room next door. Rick rubbed his cheeks as he studied the map in front of him in annoyance. Your sister is quite interesting. Wu-Ming, who was sitting on the bed, said with a smile. Well, she hasn't been this happy in a long time. This pain is worth it. Rick now understood that Crone had become like that after seeing his smile. Although Crone usually looked cheerful, she was always worried about her family, her brother Rick. The reason why Rick let Crone go was because he blamed himself for showing his bad attitude to his family. If only my sister could always be like this. Rick smiled. That depends on you, Rick. As long as you're happy, your sister will be happy too. Wu-Ming, who was on the bed, said with boredom. Shiobi, on the other hand, sat beside Wu-Ming obediently and didn't do anything else. Well, that's true. Then, let's talk business, Lord God, Rick said seriously. Chapter 430. The first step in Wu-Ming and Rick's plan was to prevent the humans from becoming the final battlefield. I already know about the secret weapons of the goblins and forest elves. However, that alone isn't enough to gather them together. As he spoke, Rick placed the map on the ground and showed it to Wu-Ming. The Skywings are on the continent opposite Lucia, Yar Ayla. If we want them to leave Lucia, we'll need a plan, Rick said. The other races are either retreating from the battle or are too few in number. Furthermore, they're unable to fight against the other powerful races and want to reap the benefits. The only races with power are the Skywings, forest elves, and goblins. Wu-Ming marked the territories of the three races on the map. To put it simply, as long as the forest elves and goblins are in conflict, they'll rope in some of the other races and form two camps, Rick said with a smile. This was a long-term understanding of the big picture. It was basically impossible to be wrong. Then, what we need to do now is to get the people of the various races on Lucia to leave. That'll require us to gather information. Then, Wu-Ming and Rick looked at each other and smiled. Then, regarding the issue of manpower, I'll go select people to form a suicide squad later. After all, those races were scattered all over Lucia. If Rick were to rely on himself, it would take a very long time. Assuming that Rick found out about the Goblin's trump card and revealed the information about the Forest Goblin's Zeroth protection of the Void, then started to walk towards the Forest Goblin's territory. When he arrived at the Forest Goblin's territory, Rick would find that the two sides had already started fighting. The goblins, who were wary of the Forest Goblins, had won the battle and killed the Forest Goblins without leaving anything behind. That would completely mess up the plan. Hence, they needed manpower and messenger pigeons. Even so, Rick, you haven't forgotten about me, have you? I'm super strong. Wu-Ming looked at Rick. Rick understood what Wu-Ming meant. As long as Wu-Ming displayed his destructive power, it would be easy for the other races to retreat. After all, no one wanted to live in an area with a bomb nearby. But, isn't this the time to prove the possibility of humanity? Just wait and see. When I need you, I won't hold back. Rick smiled wantonly as he looked at Wu-Ming. Then I'll wait and see. Wu-Ming did not insist. He was here to save the humans, but he was not their nanny. It would be best if the humans could save themselves. If not, Wu-Ming would step in. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Please come in, Rick said. Rick had told him that he had something to discuss with the Villo, so he told him to knock on the door first if he wanted to find him. Creak, the door was pushed open, and Rick's sister, Crone, walked in. Villo, Shiobi, the room is ready. You can use it later, Crone said gently. Yes, sorry to trouble you, Miss Crone. Wu-Ming smiled at Crone. Thank you. Shiobi had been told by Wuming that she had to say thank you in this situation. Wah, I can't, this child is too cute. Crone rushed up and hugged Shiobi, rubbing against her. Ugh. Shiobi made a silent protest. Ha ha ha, looks like Miss Crone likes my sister a lot. Then, can I trouble you to take her for a bath? Wuming smiled and suggested. Ah. This time, not only Crone, but even Rick was surprised. Can I? I'll take good care of this child. Crone was surprised because she was happy to be able to bathe such a cute child. Then I'll have to trouble you. By the way, this child is very shy. If possible, can you bathe Shiobi alone? Wuming smiled and nodded. No problem, no problem. I'll take good care of Shiobi. I promise to bathe Shiobi until she's white and clean. Crone rubbed against Shiobi again. Be good and listen to your sister, Shiobi. Wuming stared at Shiobi and said. Shiobi. Got it, then. Crone led Shiobi and left. Wait a minute, Villo. If we let Crone bathe Shiobi, won't we be exposed? Rick said in a panic. After all, even if he used a camouflage spell to change Shiobi's image in the eyes of others, once they were honest with each other, Crone who touched Shiobi would realize that something was wrong. Just like Shiobi's hair. Although it looked soft, it was actually made of ultra-tough metal wire. When she washed her hair, she would realize that something was wrong. Don't worry, Rick. I've already used suggestion magic on Crone. No matter how much I touch her, Crone will treat Shiobi as a human, Wuming said as he raised his hand and a ray of light appeared. This way, Shiobi will be able to better integrate into human life. What was that saying again? Being honest with each other was often a good way to increase trust. Just like the Japanese mixed bath. Cough cough. Back to the topic. Really, magic is so useful. Rick said enviously with his dead fish eyes. Let's continue. Then, Wuming and Rick sat opposite each other and continued their conversation. After a moment of conversation, Wuming understood Rick's meaning. Because we've considered that the other party will directly kill the informant, so we need to prepare more people. Wuming said. This was also why Rick needed a suicide squad. If there were too few people, the plan might fail. Yes, so I will gather some trustworthy people who can be part of the suicide squad and tell them about this, Rick said in a sorrowful tone. Therefore, these people were basically dead once they died. Rick's plan was for these people, including Rick himself, not to return to the village. They would be treated as dead ghosts who went out to explore. In addition, because the skeleton of the elves had the effect of shielding their aura, they needed to cover their bodies with some skeleton of the elves when they faced people of different races during missions. This was what humans called black ash. However, the skeleton of the elves had strong corrosive properties. Covering it with acid was equivalent to covering one's body with it. After a long time, one would directly die. This was the true meaning of Suicide Squad and ghosts. They were not afraid of death and dared to act as ghosts and become real ghosts. Clank, a bottle of potion was placed on the table by Wuming and made a sound. This is. Rick looked at the blue bottle of potion in confusion. This is a potion that can be used to contact abnormal states. If it's the corrosion of the skeleton of the elves, it might be effective. Try it later, Wuming said. This bottle of potion was an item in the Yggdrasil game, specifically used to deal with abnormal conditions. Wuming thought that corrosion was also an abnormal state, so he took it out and asked Rick to try it. You've been a great help, Villo. Rick looked at Wuming excitedly, and then carefully picked up the bottle of blue potion. Wuming smiled when he saw how careful Rick was. Clank. Clank. The table was full of these potions. Clank. Clank. Rick was dumbfounded. You can have as many as you want. Don't be shy. Wuming smiled and pointed at the table. Wuming took all of the potions that Nizalik had. Since Nizalik could make more, Wuming took all of them. Damn it. You bastards. Then, Rick's miserable cries could be heard. Chapter 431. Riker and Wuming went out to experiment. Riker smeared the black ash that could be seen everywhere on his hand, and then dripped a few drops of blue potion on the back of his hand. Instantly, the black ash disappeared, and the corrosive effect also disappeared. In the room, Wuming and Riker sat opposite each other. Shiobi sat beside Wuming in boredom. She had already been cleaned up by Crone and changed into her pajamas. Damn it, evil gods, go to hell. Riker muttered. Hey, that's about enough. You can't even handle such a small blow. Wuming smiled helplessly. The reason why Riker was like this was simply because Wuming's nouveau riche way of doing things provoked Riker. After all, in this war-torn era, everything was precious, and people cherished it very much. Based on the effect just now, if everyone covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of blue potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours. After that, the black ash would be eliminated by the power of the potion. After all, the effects of taking it inside the body and taking it outside the body were completely different. Riker was also thinking of the worst-case scenario. Therefore, if a person covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours before disappearing. Then use this amount as the standard and see the situation, Wuming said. After all, there was no need to cover the whole body with black ash. Not to mention the corrosive effect of the black ash, even if the potion was effective, pain and scars would still be left. Moreover, for humans, the black ash only needed to cover a quarter of the body to completely conceal the aura, so that other races wouldn't be able to determine who the intruder was. For example, covering an arm to the chest, abdomen, and neck with black ash could almost completely conceal the aura of a human. Well, I will choose the members of the ghost tonight. Riker didn't dwell on the issue of Wuming's nouveau riche and became serious. Speaking of which, Riker, leave the forest essence to me. Wuming looked at Riker seriously. You don't believe me. Although he said so, Rick still understood Wuming's intention. The forest elves were actually an exceptionally cunning, or rather, suspicious and vengeful race. Even though the goblins had developed magic airships and the orcs had mastered advanced navigation technology, the forest goblins had also developed magic airships that could cover an entire forest. Although its performance was not as good as the goblins. But in reality, these races were not as easy to deal with as the forest fairies. To put it simply, the forest elves were not as easy to fool as the other races. Compared to Rick and the others, Wuming could at least escape unscathed. At least it's safer this way. I don't want you to come back half dead or unable to come back. Wuming jokingly teased Rick. Then, are you confident? Rick first smiled, then looked at Wuming seriously. Of course, Wuming said without hesitation, with a confident expression on his face. But I'll have to ask your ghost unit to cooperate with me a little. No problem. Shiobi didn't speak at the side. She just looked at the conversation between the two as if they were old friends who had been together for many years. Data flowed in her orange-yellow eyes. This is also, heart, just like that, a great plan that could subvert all races was unveiled once again. The next morning, Wuming came out of his room early. Wuming didn't go to see the recruitment of the ghost last night. He just took a quick look and left with Shiobi. Coincidentally, because Wuming and Rick's rooms were next to each other, Wuming met Rick, who was about to leave his room as soon as he went out. Yo, Rick, you're up early. Wuming greeted. You actually have the nerve to greet me. I originally wanted you and Zio to support me, but you actually sneaked away. Rick had a tragic expression. You don't know how nervous I was at that time. Everyone was looking at me. So many people only looked at me when I became the village chief. You don't know, Wuming didn't listen to Rick's complaints. Instead, he looked at Shiobi who was holding his hand. By the way, this was suggested by Shiobi. Shiobi used the reason of shouldn't siblings hold hands to let Wuming hold her hand. Is she afraid of crowds? Wuming said with interest. Shiobi doesn't know. Shiobi calmly shook her head. Right, Shiobi, how was your interaction with Crone yesterday? After all, Shiobi and Crone were honest with each other. They must have gotten along well. On the other hand, Shiobi seemed to have recalled something terrible. Wuming could clearly sense that Shiobi's body trembled slightly. Crone is so scary. Shiobi recalled how Crone hugged and played with Shiobi in the shower yesterday. She felt a lingering fear. Seeing Shiobi like this, Wuming could only smile awkwardly and didn't say anything else. Hey! Don't ignore me. Suddenly, Rick raised his voice. Oh, are you done, Rick? Wuming responded with a smile. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Rick shook his head. The ghost is ready. We only need an opportunity to act. After all, many people leaving the village was a matter of concern. Hence, they couldn't just let those who were willing to become ghosts leave the village. Wuming brought 2 pieces of news to Rick. Good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Bad news, Rick answered without hesitation. I noticed a gnome worship nearby, as well as a few dragon gnomes. Perhaps because the 2 races had a conflict before, the gnomes and dragon gnomes didn't like each other. What Wuming meant was that this time, the 2 would most likely affect the surrounding human villages, which were Rick's small villages. Hearing this, Rick frowned at first. Then, his brows relaxed. Through this bad news, Rick also guessed the good news. That's right. It's just as you thought. After this attack, the ghosts can act. Wuming smiled. Wuming woke up early in the morning to tell Rick these 2 pieces of news. At this moment, the mountain where the village was located shook violently. Without a doubt, the gnomes and dragon gnomes nearby were fighting. You really have a crow's mouth. Rick didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Wuming. He didn't know whether to praise or scold him. Chapter 432. Everyone, leave from the west exit. Crone shouted, directing the panicking crowd to leave. Although Wuming and Rick didn't wake up late, Crone and a portion of the villagers woke up even earlier than them. These villagers were mostly young men and women. The rest of the villagers were old, weak, sick, disabled, and children. The rest of the villagers were woken up by the tremors outside. Following the shouts of their loved ones, they hurriedly packed their luggage and left in the designated direction. This was because the humans in this world would be affected by the battles of other races after a period of time. Therefore, the humans had to prepare their luggage early in order to prepare for any unexpected situations. In this era, death was a common occurrence. It was even possible to lose one's life while sleeping. Therefore, the people were used to preparing their luggage early. Like people who were used to earthquakes, they didn't panic and left in an orderly manner. However, it could be seen that the humans in this world lived in a cruel world. Seeing that almost everyone was leaving, Crone noticed that Rick and the Villo siblings didn't leave. Did something happen? Crone said worriedly. According to Rick, the Villo and Shiobi were clear-headed, so he wanted to discuss some issues with them. Crone believed Rick's words. After all, if the Villo siblings weren't smart, they wouldn't be able to wander around in this chaotic world. Because idiots had already died in the hands of natural disasters, black and gray, and other races. Even if it was because they had overslept the previous night, it was impossible for Rick, Varen, and the others to not be affected by such a violent tremor. Therefore, the only answer was that something else had happened. Crone ran to Rick's room. Looking at the half-closed door, Crone trembled as she pushed the door open. Rick's body trembled as he knelt on the ground in grief and let out a sorrowful cry. Damn it! How many more times do I have to go through this, Rick? Crone looked at her grief-stricken brother and couldn't bear to see him like this. Crone hugged Rick from behind and comforted him. That's enough, Rick. Leave the rest to me. Then, the corners of Rick's mouth curved into a smile. Have you memorized it, Willow? After Rick finished speaking, Wuming and Zio appeared at the door. At the same time, Wuming was holding a pen and paper in his hand. Not a single word missing. Wuming raised the paper in his hand at the same time. That's it, Crone. You're the next village chief. This is the map of the next village. The safest path is along the edge. Rick stood up and handed a map to Crone. Ha! Crone didn't even realize what had happened. That's it, Chloe. With that, Rick walked to the door and met up with Wuming. Wait. Wait a minute, what the hell is going on? Rick, where are you going? Crone was extremely confused. Even though Crone's talent was enough for her to become the village chief, she still couldn't accept Rick's sudden departure. Just ending this game. Don't worry. Rick turned around and smiled wantonly. Don't worry. I still have a sister to take care of. I won't mess around with Rick. Wuming raised his hand and suggested. This made Crone sigh in relief. She couldn't accept the sudden departure of a new friend. Then, I'll leave Zio to you. Wuming pushed Zio into Crone's arms. Ha! Although Crone liked this cute child, she couldn't bear to see them messing around like this. And just as Crone was about to say something, Shiobi spoke. Please. You. Big sister. Crone. Shiobi stuttered shyly as she looked at Crone with her big watery eyes. Instantly, the suggestion magic that Wuming cast on Zio was activated. With Zio's cute performance, Crone, who was a normal person, seemed to have been charmed. Wah, leave it to me. Instantly, Crone shrieked as she hugged Zio and rubbed against her. I'm just sending Rick off. I'll be back soon. After Wuming finished speaking, Rick and Wuming left. After Wuming and Rick left, Crone reacted. You must return safely. She prayed to the running man. Outside, on the path of retreat. Due to the fight between the goblins and the dragon goblins, not only did the ordinary people have to return to the village, even Rick and the specters had to return to the specter's nest. Now, Wuming and Rick were walking on the path to the specter's nest. I wanted to ask, are you going back to the village? Rick looked at Wuming suspiciously. Therefore, according to the plan, Wuming had almost no time to leave Rick and the others and return to the village. I have my ability. I can create a clone of the same level as me. Wuming explained. Wuming's dependent avatar had the ability to split his avatar. Wuming was going to use that ability to send his avatar back to the village to take care of Shiobi. After all, Shiobi was just living with human beings. Not to mention whether Shiobi's avatar would be discovered by human beings. Moreover, Shiobi needed someone to enlighten her. It just so happens that I also have a question. Wuming said. Do you want me to record what you said just now? Isn't that something that can be forged in minutes? Only the heavens knew why there was a need for someone to record the words with a pen and paper as proof. Wuming wasn't wrong at all. That thing could be forged directly, it's just a title to replace the village chief. It's not that useful. Rick smiled slightly. You really have a bad taste. Wuming joked. Goddess Sama is not qualified to say that. Rick retorted. Ha ha ha, both of them laughed. When they came to the entrance of a cave, both Wuming and Rick stopped. Then, I'll go first. Wuming looked away. Well, we will also launch a strategy against the goblins and the orcs in 5 days. Immediately, without saying much, Rick and Wuming walked into the cave with their backs facing each other. Rick walked directly into the cave, and Wuming flew directly into the sky and flew away. So, they were really going to leave after sending him off. Chapter 433. After Wuming left the human gathering place, he directly returned to his true form and flew into the sky. Then, because of the plan, Wuming directly cancelled the various shielding techniques on his body. At the same time, Wuming also released his own energy, which was the holy aura. At that moment, Wuming was like a flame in the night, no, a fireball, which was extremely eye-catching. Now, the goblins' air fleet is on the northern coast of Lucia. Wuming remembered the map that Rick showed him. Wuming stayed in the air and looked to the north. Wuming's current location was south of Lucia, which was not far from the northern coast. Let's mess around a little. With that said, Wuming spread his wings and quickly flew toward the north. In the south, Lucia and Yar-Ala intersected. It was an ocean, and the forest elves' fleet was sailing from that ocean. As the current chief octopal sorcerer of the forest elves and the main researcher of the Zeroth Ward of the Void, Shinki Nirbalion's wisdom was naturally needless to say. She was also quite proud of herself, so she took on the heavy responsibility of the forest elves' fleet commander. However, she was rather fearful of the mysterious powerful being that the dragon spirit mentioned. After all, even though it was annoying to think of a musclehead who didn't have any intelligence and relied solely on brute strength, Shik had to admit that his powerful strength was indeed frightening. As a result, it was no longer appropriate for her to act freely in Lucia. Shinki once suspected the identity of the mysterious powerhouse, but she could not tell which race he was from until the creator of the Sky Forest Elves, Canis, arrived. Her creator, the god Canis, had told her that the mysterious expert was not from another race, but a god from another world. However, the star cup of that planet did not work on him, so she did not have to worry about him competing for the star cup. Coincidentally, she received news recently that the forest elves' old rival, the goblins, was attacked. According to the spy's report, the goblins could not capture the other party's figure, and the fleet's instruments could only detect a large number of powerful energy sources. Those energy sources were not elves, but unknown energy sources. From this, Shinki judged that the dragon who attacked the goblins' fleet was the powerhouse from another world that Canis mentioned. Therefore, Shinki decided to evacuate the forest elves from Lucia. However, it seemed that the goblins' losses were not serious. Because of that, it just proved that the mysterious powerhouse was just passing by, and the reason for the attack was unknown. In any case, the forest elves enjoyed watching the forest elves. Shinki made such a decision in order not to let her people follow in their footsteps. So, as the forest elves fleet, the elves' airship fleet, the elves' airship fleet, and headed to the Yar-Ala continent. Naturally, Shinki had his own plans for heading towards the continent of Yar-Ala. Godz's, the Zeroth elves, the Zeroth god, was the elves' was the god. Standing at the front of the fleet, Shinki looked at the Lucia continent. For the sake of our god, please bless us, Canis. Shinki prayed to his god. And at that moment, not good. Lord Shinki. An ordinary forest elf soldier hurriedly ran to the bow of the ship. What's the matter? Don't panic. Shinki looked at the soldier unhappily. Yes. I'm sorry, Lord Shinki. The soldier calmed down and stood up straight. Tell me, what happened? Shinki asked casually. It's like this, Lord Shinki, our magic has detected an unknown energy source, and the amount is huge. The captain asked me to inform you. What did you say? In the captain's room of the Forest Elves' magic airship flagship. Shinki walked in a little panic, and his eyes suddenly rushed to the big screen. What the hell is going on? Shinki said with a little anger. At that moment, because of the confidentiality issue, there was only one captain left in the entire captain's room, and that captain didn't know why Shinki was angry, so the captain had to report truthfully. It's like this, Lord Shinki, we just detected a large non-elven energy source. I'm worried that it's that, so I asked the soldier to inform you. The captain said politely. Even he had to show respect to the Zeroth Shield's chief's 8 stages, and the Zeroth elves. That was why Shinki roared angrily as soon as he came in. Shinki naturally understood what the other party meant by that. As the captain, Shinki naturally knew that the goblins were attacked, and he also knew that the goblins were also attacked after detecting a large non-elven energy source. The soldier didn't know the situation, so after being persuaded by Shinki, he reported very calmly. And Shinki naturally knew that the situation changed from the goblins' panic to the red-crowned cranes and the red-crowned cranes. That made Shinki feel like she was fooled, and that was why Shinki was so angry as soon as he entered the room. That didn't attack. Shinki frowned slightly and asked the captain. Because the goblins were attacked after detecting that energy source, Shinki was shocked that they weren't attacked. No, but the other party used a shielding spell. We can't use detection magic to see the other party's influence, we can only see with our eyes. The captain shook his head. The other party's identity is a mystery. Not only did it interfere with the battle between the dragon elves and Kikai elves, but it also attacked the goblins, and it's not one of us. The captain said in distress. Of course, the arrival of the god Canis would not let the captain know. Although his status was slightly higher, it was not that high. In order to maintain a sense of mystery, only 10 people knew about the arrival of Canis. Those 10 people were either powerful or strong, and Shinki, as the main developer of the Zeroth Shield, naturally knew about it. You don't have to worry about the other party's identity, the higher-ups have their own arrangements. Where is the other party now? Shinki changed the topic. The captain quickly checked the energy source, and as a result, the captain was shocked, and his face changed. It's right here, what? Shinki was also surprised. The captain brought up the image, and the energy source just happened to coincide with the flagship. Yo, 2 forest elves. Chapter 434. Wuming's voice came from the captain's room. Who is it? The captain roared and looked towards the source of the voice. A young man with black hair and red pupils wearing a loose white shirt appeared out of thin air at the door of the captain's room and leaned against the wall of the captain's room. Oh, aren't you looking for me? Wuming smiled. Xanku frowned slightly and said to the captain without turning her head. You can leave first. But, Lord Xanku. Okay, I understand. The captain wasn't stupid and walked towards Wuming's position. That was the door. Wuming wasn't afraid that the captain would go home and call for reinforcements, because both sides knew that violence wouldn't solve the problem. The captain's room door opened, and the captain took a deep look at Wuming before leaving. Bam, tch, the captain's room door closed again. Now, the only ones left in the captain's room were the Forest Elite's chief level 8 sorcerer Xanku Nirba and Wuming. Then, Lord God, what can I do for you? Xanku politely bowed slightly and greeted Wuming. Don't be nervous, Wuming said calmly, then walked to the captain's room and sat down. I don't mean any harm. Wuming maintained a smile as if everything was within his control, and looked at Xanku with incomparable arrogance. You must be joking, Lord Canis has already told us about you. As a god from another world, you don't need to compete for the Star Cup, so please tell us your intentions. Xanku's words were still polite, but Wuming could hear the mockery in her words. You really dare to say that, Canis creation? Wuming was instantly angered. Although he still had a smile, the anger in his eyes and the aura he emitted made Xanku feel terrified. After all, Lord Canis is a supreme existence, we can't compare to you in terms of power or wisdom, so please forgive Xian Ku's offense. Xian Kunirba's meaning was clear. They were weak, so it was better to be straightforward with a powerful being like Canis, because they had to agree no matter what. Wuming naturally understood this, so he only got a little angry and calmed down. Then, I'll be straightforward. Then I'll get straight to the point. I found something interesting in the air fleet of the goblins. It's an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. What? Xian Ku heard Wuming's words and couldn't stay calm. Not only was she surprised that Wuming knew about the Zeroth protection of the void, but she was also surprised that the goblins had an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. Don't worry, even if I know about the Zeroth protection of the void, I won't do anything to you. Besides, I'm here for your own good this time, Wuming smiled and calmed Xian Ku down. Her beautiful face was solemn. Then, Lord Canis, are you going to tell us about the gophers? Xian Ku asked. There was another layer of meaning in this sentence. Even if you are helping us forest elves, do you have a purpose or something else? After all, it was impossible to give without expecting anything in return. There was no such thing as a free lunch. As a wise person, Xian Kunirba naturally understood this principle. Don't be nervous. You also know that I can't use this planet's star cup even if I obtain it. I don't have any other purpose, I'm just doing this for my own pleasure, Wuming shrugged and waved his hand. Pleasure. Xian Ku furrowed her brows in confusion. After all, I can't obtain any benefits from this world. I can only enjoy the pleasure this world brings me, Wuming explained. The goblins have developed a weapon that can explode divine marrow. It's called marrow explosion. The marrow explosion is all loaded in their aerial fleet and can be launched at any time. Wuming's words made Xian Ku slightly excited. Explode divine marrow. Xian Ku fell into deep thought. If that was the case, it would indeed have the same deterrence as the Zeroth protection of the void. It was better to believe it than not. They had to be cautious. Let me give you another reminder. The goblins already know that you have the Zeroth protection of the void. Wuming's words gave Xian Ku another heavy blow. How is that possible? Xian Ku thought that her forest goblin's defense system and anti-spy system were perfect. Therefore, Xian Ku didn't think that anyone would be able to sneak in and discover their secret weapon. The Zeroth protection of the void was correct. Since you can send spies to the other side can naturally send spies as well. Don't be too complacent, forest goblins, Wuming warned. All in all, just be careful. I don't want this good show to be ruined. With that, Wuming stood up and prepared to leave. Thank you for the information, sir, Xian Ku bowed deeply to Wuming. However, her voluptuous chest swayed in front of Wuming's face. Cough cough. It's nothing. After all, I was very bored when I accidentally got lost in this world. How can I not find some entertainment for myself? I hope you won't disappoint me. With that, a black space appeared in front of Wuming. The space swallowed Wuming and the black door disappeared. It seemed that the other party relied on this thing to enter. Why didn't the comfortable version of shielding space teleportation work? Could it be that it wasn't space teleportation? Xian Ku began to think hard. However, this was none of Wuming's business. Phew. Wuming let out a long sigh. Seriously, I'm really not suited to play the bad guy. At this moment, Wuming leaned against a tree and rested. Suddenly, a golden light appeared on Wuming's arm and a clear voice said, Sir Wuming, you were lying to that young lady, right? Of course. I just went to the goblin's place to cover it up. You've been following me all this time. Other than the fact that the goblins have marrow explosion, everything else was a lie. Wuming smiled proudly. Including his easily angered and arrogant behavior, as well as the spy's information and his own goal, none of it could be said to be true. As for the fact that he couldn't use the star cup, Wu Ming hadn't even seen it before. Who knew if he could use it? In any case, Wu Ming had no intention of using the star cup. After all, the forest goblins have many wise people. Being able to create the Zeroth Ward of the Void and use a fake name, Xian Kunalbarian, is a wise person among wise people. If I don't tell her this, she probably won't believe me. Even if Wu Ming gave Xian Ku the impression that he was an easily angered, arrogant, rude, and vulgar god from another world, Xian Ku would still listen to him. After all, it was better to believe it than not. It would be troublesome if she failed miserably. I've done what I should. The rest will be left to Rick. What I should do now is to meet Artemisia. Chapter 435. In a secret cave somewhere, Rick and Wu Ming sat opposite each other. In front of them was a map that was larger than an ordinary one. On the map were chess pieces carved from crystals of different colors. These chess pieces represented the various races. Now, there were no more chess pieces representing the various races on the Lucia continent on the map. In other words, the major races had already withdrawn from the Lucia continent. There were basically no large races left on the continent where humans were. In that case, the first step is complete, Wu Ming said calmly. The goal of not letting the continent where humans were located become a battlefield had been achieved. The battlefield on the Yar-Ala continent has also been formed. Rick smiled as if everything was under his control. In the southeast of the Yar continent, there were chess pieces representing the forest elves, fairy elves, and dragon elves. The forest elves entered the southeast of the Yar continent through the southern part of the Lucia continent and pulled out the fairy elves, who had retired from their hidden nests, to join the forest elves alliance. With the idea that the enemy of their enemy was their friend, the forest elves pulled in the dragon elves, who were at odds with the goblins. However, there were very few dragon elves. The three forces were entrenched in the southeast of the Yar-Ala continent, led by the forest elves. In the northeast of the Yar-Ala continent, there were chess pieces representing the goblins, giants, and fantasy breeds. The goblins were originally entrenched in the northwest of the Lucia continent. Due to Wu Ming's attack and the orcs' discovery of their secret weapon, Marrow Explosion, the goblin fleet had no choice but to set sail to the northwest of the Yar-Ala continent. As the giants had always been on good terms with the goblins, the two quickly began to form an alliance. The fantasy breeds joined because the goblins exposed the forest elves' magic technique, the Zeroth Ward of the Void, to the fantasy breeds. The Zeroth Ward of the Void, which was based on controlling the self-destruction of fantasy breeds, was something that the fantasy breeds hated. Therefore, the fantasy breeds joined the goblins' alliance. However, fantasy breeds were rare to begin with, so the forest elves and goblins were currently evenly matched. In addition to these three forces, there was also the native force of the Yar-Ala continent, Artheus, and the Skywing species under his command. The Skywing species occupied the body of a huge fantasy breed called a Bondiheim. This fantasy breed was an apostle subdued by the god of war, Arthas. It had followed Arthas since ancient times, acting as a gathering place for the Skywing species under his command. This third force seemed to have very few people. It consisted of Arthas, Skywing breeds, and a fantasy breed. However, even without Arthas, the Skywing breeds were still extremely powerful existences. Aside from the Skywings, there were very few other life forms, such as fantasy breeds, dragon breeds, and giant breeds. These life forms basically did not have a fixed gathering place, and even if they moved together, there would not be more than a dozen of them. As for the Skywings, because they had a gathering place, they would basically move out in groups and hunt for heads. It could be said that no one was willing to provoke the Skywings. That was why the forest goblins and goblins were on Lucia and not Yar-Ala. However, war was a collective battle, so the Skywings might be slightly weaker. However, the Skywings still had a powerful ability that they could use as a group, Skystrike. The old capital of the forest goblins, Marilon, was destroyed by a skywing skystrike. If Arthas was included, then it would be impossible to calculate. In this world, the gods were born from the elven corridor, and the gods that were born had their own characteristics, concepts, and so on. The creations of the gods were often the same as the gods. For example, the creator of the goblins, god Okan, had the title of god of forging. The goblins were also experts in the field of forging. The magic airships were the first to be researched by the goblins. The magic airships of the forest goblins were actually just using magic to make the warships fly, unlike the goblins' magic airships that used fuel ores as a power source. Canis was the god of the forest, and her creations were the elves that were close to the forest. As the god of wisdom, she could use 168 types of spells at the same time, which was the so-called 168 types of spellcasters. It should be known that the strongest of the forest goblins was the 8th type of spellcasters. That was how wise Canis was. As for the Kikai race, their god initially wanted to find someone to answer his questions, so he created 5 small machines. However, he realized that these 5 small machines could not answer his questions. Therefore, the god passed through his own spirit and died. Then, those 5 small machines developed into the current Kikai race. The god of war was naturally born from hatred, hostility, malice, blood, and other things related to war. That was why Arthas was crowned as the strongest. Therefore, the power of war was often terrifying, more terrifying than wisdom, forging, and so on. Meanwhile, the forest elves had developed the Zeroth Void Blessing, while the goblins had developed the Marrow Explosion. Both of them were confident in themselves, which was why Silent and Rick had pushed them to the Eliala continent to face off against the Skywings. Now, this could be considered the final war. That was because the remaining races basically all withdrew from the final war for their own reasons. The Sea Dwellers were not interested in the continent and did not want to participate in the war, so they lived in the deep sea. The Moon Song race had always lived on the huge red moon, standing aloof from worldly affairs. The vampires lost in the war and could not participate in the war. As for the demons, those things were actually just demons and monsters, so why would they care about the war? By the way, the beast men fled directly from the sea. They were originally not far from the goblins, so when Rick and the others leaked the information about the Marrow Explosion, they quickly gathered their entire race and retreated from the sea. As for the Kikai race, they did not provoke others, and others did not provoke them, so they lived in peace. Coincidentally, almost all of these races were races whose gods had died. It was precisely because their gods had died that they chose to preserve themselves. After all, the prize of the war was for the gods, and they might not necessarily use it even if it was given to them. The 3 forces are already in their own positions and are on guard against each other. Now, all we need is a catalyst, and the final war will begin. Then, Rick looked at Wuming. Wuming was such a catalyst. Then, there's no time to lose. Let's begin tonight, Wuming said with a nod. Then, Wuming directly entered his spatial door and left the cave. The future of humanity will be decided tonight. Chapter 436. The sun set, and night fell. In the Yar Ayla continent, Wuming floated in the air as he looked at the massive creatures in the sky. Abendheim, the gnome fleet, and the forest elves' magic airship had all settled down peacefully, forming a tripartite balance of forces. Even so, Wuming was still only interested in Arthas. Wuming had learned from studying the forest elves' Zeroth Void Blessing that the technique had extremely high lethality, but it was fine if he couldn't hit it. As for the gnome's Marrow Explosion, Wuming estimated that it could match the Zeroth Void Blessing, but it was still the same. It was fine if he couldn't hit it. If it was just a defenseless Arthas, then the Zeroth Ward of the Void and Marrow Explosion might have been effective. However, against a group of Skywing species that could use Skystrike, as well as Arthas behind the skywing species, the forest goblins and goblins would have a hard time hitting their targets. However, Wuming didn't care if the forest elves and gnomes could kill the God Slayer, or if Arthas could defeat the 6 major races. These had nothing to do with Wuming. Wuming's goal had always been clear, and that was to help Rick and let the humans obtain victory with their own hands. That was all. In this way, the Kikai species that could replicate the techniques of other races would come in handy. After all, what better way to signal the start of a battle than when the enemy released their signature technique? However, Wuming only knew one Kikai species, and that was Sayubala's, or Shiobi. However, Wuming didn't want Shiobi to participate in the battle. As Wuming had an avatar, he was very clear about Shiobi's current state. The human villagers' care and enthusiasm for Shiobi made Shiobi, who had long developed a desire to explore her heart, surge like a lake that had been opened. At present, Shiobi often had situations where data kept flowing in her eyes, her head heated up, and her body trembled as she said, "Error, error." Fortunately, Wuming's clone was there. Through Wuming's Lune runes and Yggdrasil, World Tree, magic, the villagers didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. Even Crony, who hugged Shiobi to sleep almost every night and often bathed with him, didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. In addition, Wuming would guide her from time to time. Wuming believed that Shiobi had already obtained imperfect feelings. The reason was in Wuming's hands. "Thank you, Shiobi." Wuming took out a metal sphere and thanked Shiobi, who was far away on Lucia. The metal sphere in Wuming's hand was given to him by Zio. "Nameless, needs this. I'll give it to you." Although Shiobi had feelings for him, she still had that submissive personality, although she liked it this way. "After all, we're siblings, aren't we?" Then, Shiobi handed the metal sphere to Wuming's clone. At that time, Wuming's clone looked at Shiobi with an indescribable gaze, but Shiobi only smiled. The clone believed that it was the most beautiful smile Wuming had ever seen in this world. Although it was a clone, the clone was still Wuming. Therefore, other than knowing that he was a clone, he was basically the real Wuming. Therefore, Wuming's clone accepted Shiobi's gift and patted her head. "Thank you, Shiobi." In order to let Shiobi stay here with peace of mind, Wuming's clone accepted the metal sphere and immediately used a teleportation door to transfer the metal sphere to Wuming's hand. He also explained to Shiobi the truth that he was a clone. Shiobi didn't feel depressed. Even if you're a clone, your love for Shiobi isn't any less than your main body. This made Wuming's doppelganger extremely touched. "We can't disappoint the young lady's kind intentions." At this moment, Wuming said as he injected magic into the metal ball. Although it wasn't, Wuming's special ability allowed devil power to use these devices that relied on power. In an instant, the metal sphere turned into a simple armor and stuck tightly to Wuming's body. This feeling. Is it the Jikai type? Wuming extended his hand and moved his arm that was already covered in metal. When the clone gave Wuming the metal sphere, he didn't tell Wuming how to use it. He simply told him to inject devil power into it. He didn't expect it to be an external armor of the Jikai type. However, it didn't seem to be just that. With his mind, a lens appeared in Wuming's left eye. Through the lens, Wuming could see things like analysis. However, because Wuming wasn't a Jikai type, he couldn't understand the data. "I see. Is part of the Jikai type's ability in this armor?" Wuming understood the function of this thing. The metal sphere from before could be said to be a byproduct of Shiobi's split. It could also be said to be an inferior version of the Jikai type. Wuming was no longer surprised by the Jikai type that evolved from just 5 small square boxes. The Jikai type was a bug. Because Wuming didn't have the Jikai type's calculation ability, he couldn't inherit all of this power. However, it was still possible to use a weapon. Wuming raised his 2 arms that were covered in thin metal and aimed at the gnomes and forest spirits. "Let me try." Something that contained Shobi's feelings. Pseudo-skystrike. After Wuming finished speaking, the magic power in his body burned fiercely like fuel. Wuming's entire body shone like a bright star in the night. Then, 2 long sniper rifle barrels extended from Wuming's palms. Simulating the skystrike of the skywing type, the 2 forces instantly condensed, and then, boom! 2 huge cannonball-like sounds resounded through the sky. 2 meteors flew straight toward the forest spirit's magic airships and the gnome's magic fleet. Boom! There were violent roars on both sides, and flames shone in the night. From the flames, Wuming could vaguely see that a few of the gnome's ships had fallen. On the other hand, the magic airship of the forest fairies was fine. It made sense. The forest spirit's airships were definitely filled with defensive spells. Even if the gnome's fleet had defensive spells, they wouldn't be able to use them as well as the forest spirits. After all, Wuming's previous attack had expended a lot of magic power, but it had only brought down a few of the gnome's magic airships. Is it because of the imitation? Wuming looked at the gun barrel that was still smoking due to the overload. However, he had achieved his goal, which was to start this war that wouldn't start for a long time. Wuming looked at the gigantic whale-like fantasy breed, Abendheim. After removing the armor on his body and placing the metal ball into the golden ripples, Wuming created another clone, and his main body flew toward Abendheim. The clone that had 50% of Wuming's main body remained where it was. The only difference was that the left arm of the clone was covered in a black glove. Plan B had begun. Chapter 437. On the fantasy breed of Abendheim, the green-haired skywing breed's first creation, Osriel, sat on the edge of a rock, casually looking at the joint fleet of the forest elves and gnomes. Truly a bunch of people who don't know their limits, meow, Osriel said with a peculiar tone, her 2 eyes revealing death. This was a characteristic of the skywing breeds. Looking directly into their eyes would mean seeing death. How boring. Why aren't they attacking yet? I can't wait to collect their heads. The final creation, Giliel, flew beside Osriel in boredom, her pink hair wantonly fluttering. Although she looked like a loser, the death in Giliel's eyes was no less than Osriel's. Well, after all, the other party is coming with such ferocity. It's best to be cautious, meow, although that was what she said, Osriel's face was brimming with a frivolous smile. She did not believe that these people could defeat their creator, war god Artesius, even if they worked together. Besides, they had not yet worked together and had instead chosen to split into 2 to form a tripartite confrontation. How sad. If they worked together, they might have had a chance, meow, Osriel said mockingly. Don't say that, Osriel. In any case, they'll definitely be defeated by Lord Artesius. It doesn't matter if they work together or not. Giliel flew behind Osriel, waving her hands as she calmly said. It seemed that the skywings were truly confident in their creator, Artesius. After hearing Giliel's voice, Osriel lowered her head as if she had heard something terrifying. Ah, Osriel, are you still thinking of using the same trick? Giliel seemed to already know the outcome and quickly distanced herself from Osriel, who had lowered her head. Suddenly, Osriel flew up and ran toward Giliel. Wah, little Giliel, call me big sister, meow, no way, Giliel said evasively, and Osriel chased after her. Then let me hug you for a bit please, meow, hee then try to catch up to me. Then, the 2 beautiful bird-like girls began to chase each other in the air. If one were to take a closer look, other than the length of their hair, the color of their hair, and their faces, the 2 of them were quite similar in terms of clothing style and body proportions. If one were to say that the 2 of them were fraternal twins, people would believe it. In truth, all the skywing species looked similar. After all, they were all made from the feather fragments of the god of war, Arthas. It could be said that all the skywing species were sisters. As for the wings, they were a necessity for the skywing species. At this moment, Osriel and Gillian came to a halt and gazed into the distance. That wasn't where the forest goblins or goblins' fleets were located. Instead, it was an empty space. However, if one looked carefully, they would be able to see where the light came from. One had to know that even a little light in the dark would attract attention, not to mention, that's right. That was Skystrike, Gilliel said calmly. The Sky Wings were the most familiar with the abilities of the Sky Wings, but this Skystrike seemed especially powerful. Sure enough, at this moment, that light suddenly split into two and flew toward the forest goblins and goblins. Boom! Almost instantly, the Skystrike struck the forest goblins and goblins' fleets, creating a huge explosion. I've already given the order for the Sky Wings to obediently stay here, meow. Osriel frowned. Those two Skystrikes were already the most powerful attacks a single Skywing could unleash. This was also why the lively and active Gillian had not gone out. Well, who knows? Maybe some of the sisters are a little willful, Gillian said jokingly with a smile. The flames of the explosion soared into the sky like a beautiful flower in the dark night, igniting the flames of war. Time to go, little Gillian. Get ready to attack, meow, Osriel said. Whether it was the Skywing sisters or someone pretending to be them, the forest goblins and goblins would not turn a blind eye to the provocation of the Sky Wings just because of a misunderstanding. Is the battle finally about to begin? Gillian smiled happily, the death in her eyes becoming even more apparent. On the other side, on the forest goblins' fleet. Lady Shinka, we've been attacked by the Skywing Skystrike. What do we do? Should we counterattack? The captain asked, somewhat flustered. Have the dragon goblins wait for now. Rule the fairy goblins and prepare to activate the Zeroth Void blessing with us, Shinka said calmly as she looked at the captain. Yes, sir. The captain saluted and left. After the captain left, Shinka wiped the sweat off her forehead. What's with that Skystrike? My defensive technique almost failed to block it. Indeed, that Skystrike had been blocked by Shinka's defensive technique. If the forest goblins' warships had taken it head-on, there was a 100% chance that several of their warships would have been destroyed. Isn't the goblins a good example? Shinka thought to herself as she looked at the downed warships of the goblins. But the Skywings shouldn't be that stupid. After all, the situation was not favorable at all. Starting a war at this time was the most unwise choice. Or maybe someone is framing us. Shinka frowned and stroked her chin. However, even if someone was framing them or the Skywings were deliberately starting a war, they were still in a passive position. The fireworks just now was like a signal. Not only the Sky Wings, but the goblins had also begun to take action. After all, the goblins had already lost a few magic airships. How could they not take revenge? Furthermore, the goblins probably did not realize that someone was framing the Sky Wings. However, there was no need for that. They just needed to win. My Zeroth Void blessing is invincible. Sky Wings, goblins, and war god Artemisu, just wait for your destruction, Shinka said confidently. However, they would soon be slapped in the face. On the other side, the goblin fleet. Sure enough, the goblins' fleet had already begun to reload their marrow bombs after losing a few of their magic airships. Meanwhile, the goblins had temporarily pacified the fantasy breeds and giant breeds. The arrogant goblin leader was prepared to use his secret weapon to destroy the Zeroth Void blessing of the forest goblins and the Skystrike of the Skywings. There was no doubt that he was an arrogant fellow. The Skywings gathered together and activated Skystrike. Because Lord Artemisu did not appear for some reason, all the Skywings began to listen to Osriel's orders and prepared to use Skystrike to simulate Artemisu's divine strike to deal with the forest goblins and goblins. On the other side, at the forefront of the forest goblin fleet, Shinka stood at the bow of the fleet and nodded at the Zeroth Void blessing prepared by the forest goblins behind her. On the other side, the goblin leader also nodded when he saw that the marrow bombs had already been reloaded. At the same time, the three sides seemed to have come to an agreement and unleashed their strongest attacks. Pseudo Sky Strike. Zeroth Void Blessing, Release. Marrow Bomb, Fire. A white holy light with golden edges, an energy pillar filled with green energy, and several missiles comparable to hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs were used at the same time. However, these three attacks seemed to be attracted by something and directly deviated from their predetermined trajectories, heading toward an empty space. Osriel realized something. That was where the sky strike that had started the battle had been fired. Wu Ming's doppelganger raised his left arm and activated the divine artifact level weapon. Activate, Arm of Greed. Chapter 438. Wu Ming raised his arm of greed high up. The vambrace on his arm was like a black hole, producing an unparalleled suction force. It was this powerful suction force that attracted pseudo-divine strike, Zeroth Void Blessing, and Marrow Explosion. That dark arm of greed was a replica of Nazarik's world-class item, Avarice and Desireless. After all, Wu Ming had given the real Avarice and Desireless to Marley. Wu Ming himself didn't need those world-class items, so he didn't want to take them back. In addition, Wu Ming had the ability Create Great Item. Because Create Great Item had an extraordinary effect when used by Wu Ming, even if he couldn't create world-class items, Wu Ming could create them. By the way, because the original ability of Avarice and Desireless was to absorb the EXP of the dead, Wu Ming modified the pseudo-Avarice and Desireless he created. Therefore, in order to create the two black and white arms of Avarice and Desireless, Wu Ming consumed a lot of magical power. That was why the battle began in the middle of the night. Wu Ming wanted to recover to his peak state to face the strongest god of war, Artesius. Although it was fine if he didn't recover to his peak state, after all, Wu Ming's magical power was almost infinite. After Wu Ming injected enough magical power into the greedy arm and desireless arm to last for the night, and a lot of magical power needed to activate them, Wu Ming handed the desireless arm to Wu Ming, while Wu Ming himself held the greedy arm. After using the weapon given by Shiobi to release the simulated sky strike, Wu Ming used a pendant to split his clone, while his main body rushed directly to the world where Artesius was. Wu Ming's clone stayed in place, wearing the greedy arm left by his main body, and began the second step of the plan. When Wu Ming's dependent split into two clones, those two clones had 50% of the main body's ability. In other words, the clone with Shiobi and the clone with the greedy arm were weakened. However, the task of the two clones was not to fight, so it didn't matter whether their strength was weakened or not. Ignoring the avatar that was with Shiobi for the time being, it didn't matter even if the avatar that was left behind by Silent and wearing the arm of greed was attacked. Therefore, the clone with the greedy arm's mission was to die. After Wu Ming transformed Avarice and Desireless no longer collected EXP, it collected power to collect it. In short, it became the ability to store skills and transform them to be released. At present, through the greedy arm, the super skills of Sky Wing, Forest Elves, and Goblins, such as Pseudo-Divine Strike, Zeroth Void Blessing, and Marrow Explosion, were all absorbed and stored. The Desireless arm, which had the ability to connect with the greedy arm, was responsible for releasing those skills again. The wielder of the Desireless arm was Rieker. Now, he was waiting at the target location planned by Wu Ming and Rieker. Waiting for Wu Ming to transfer the attacks of Sky Wing, Forest Elves, and Goblins to the greedy arm, then Rieker would launch the Desireless arm, releasing the huge attack stored in it, directly penetrating the core of the planet, and then Rieker would obtain the Star Cup. In this way, the war was over. The reason why Artesius didn't show up when Skywing launched the attack was because Wu Ming planned to take advantage of the situation while they were fighting. As if there was no boundary, the farthest place where Artesius was located exuded elf-like energy particles. The ground was some marble slabs, and in the center of the space, a white jade throne was placed there. That was Artesius's temple. A muscular man with multiple pairs of wings behind him, wearing a white robe similar to the ancient Greek style, sat on the white jade throne with his eyes closed. If one looked closely, the wings behind the man were almost identical to the wings of Skywing, except that he had 18 pairs of wings instead of one pair. There was no doubt that this man was the creator of Skywing, the strongest god of war, Artesius. Suddenly, an oval black portal appeared in that space, and Wu Ming's figure appeared from it. Artesius's temple naturally had resistance to space and time. Even Skywing, who could penetrate space at will, couldn't enter Artesius's temple unless Artesius allowed it. Wu Ming's portal skill was also a space manipulation skill in that world, but Wu Ming's portal easily passed through Artesius's temple. That was because of Wu Ming's Magus Incarnation ability. Magus Incarnation had the effect of enhancing the magic used, and Wu Ming's double incarnation ability doubled the effect directly. As a result, the temple, which originally couldn't be passed through, became accessible. This was also the reason why Wu Ming was able to enter the forest elite fleet that was equipped with spatial defensive tactics. After arriving at the temple, Rosin frowned. That temple was full of fighting intent, killing intent, blood, and everything related to war. Wu Ming didn't like it very much. However, now was not the time to care about that kind of thing. Immediately, Wu Ming turned his gaze to the throne and looked at Artesius, whose eyes were closed. "Are you Artesius? You really look like a Skywing," Wu Ming said casually, looking quite relaxed. Hearing Wu Ming's voice, Arthas opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with intense battle intent, killing intent, and bloodthirst. It was a chilling sight. Wu Ming once heard that if you looked directly into the eyes of Skywing, you would see death. Now, Wu Ming said that if you looked directly into the eyes of Artesius, the creator of Skywing, you would also see death. Do you boring gods really create things based on your own appearance? Wu Ming said somewhat uninterestedly. You're finally here, god of another world. Artesius ignored Wu Ming's ridicule and began his speech. I've waited for too long. There's no one in this world who can defeat me. Only a different world can defeat me. Hearing Artesius's words, Wu Ming smiled. You have the same temperament as that god Welslana. He's also been looking for someone who can defeat him. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Artesius's eyes lit up. There's actually such a person in another world. If I can see that god Welslana, I'll definitely fight him. However, you won't have the chance. Wu Ming began to move. His legs moved toward Artesius. His speed became faster and faster. In an instant, Wu Ming's figure disappeared in front of Artesius. Immediately after, Wu Ming's voice came from behind Artesius. I've already defeated him. Today, you'll be the same. Chapter 439. Wu Ming's voice fell, and a sword light swept across Artemisio's neck. Bang! A sound like a collision of steel came. Artemisio raised his hand and caught the incoming sword of salvation with one hand. A trace of blood flowed from Wu Ming's blade and Artemisio's palm. Not to mention that the entire temple is my perception field, I have a good understanding of space. Don't try to show off your meager skill in front of an expert. Artemisio didn't care about the pain and blood, and said calmly. Instead, the blood made Artemisio more energetic. That's right, what Wu Ming used just now was not the Phoenix Incarnation's lightning speed, but a simple space transfer magic. Although Wu Ming didn't use it before, it didn't mean that Wu Ming didn't know how to use it. It's just a simple test of your power. It's not like I'm displaying my slight skill in front of an expert. After saying that, Wu Ming once again used spatial transference magic and returned to his original position. Then, let's get started, Artemisio. Wu Ming brandished his divine blade of salvation, which was shaped like Excalibur, and pointed its tip at Artu. As you wish. After Artemisio finished speaking, his figure disappeared. There was no doubt that this was a more advanced space ability than the Skywings. At the moment when Artemisia disappeared, Wu Ming waved his sword fiercely behind him. Bang! The sound of steel colliding came again, and Wu Ming and Artemisia were shaken back. What a terrifying space ability, Artemisia. Wu Ming looked at Artemisia seriously. Although Wu Ming was called the root dragon and had the ability to adapt to space and time, it was basically passive. It could be said that he didn't have the slightest active skill. It could be said that the only time and space ability he had was the Phoenix incarnation and the space transfer magic. It could only be said that Wu Ming was still too young. Perhaps he would have to wait until he reached adulthood to fully master the space ability. As for the root dragon, cough, forget it, let's find another way. While Wu Ming spoke, Artesio also looked at his hand. There was a small bloodstain on his palm and a thick bloodstain on the back of his hand. These were all caused by Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation. The former was caused by Wu Ming being grabbed by Artesio when he ambushed him. With his self-healing ability, the wound was almost healed. The latter was a wound caused by Arthas's sneak attack on Wu Ming and the collision with Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation. The burning pain was transmitted to Arthas's nerves. Immediately, Arthu activated spirit, and the two wounds healed instantly. I didn't think that just contact and collision would be able to hurt me. As expected of a product from another world. I'm getting excited. Due to his injuries, the battle intent in Arte's eyes burned even brighter. This is the divine blade of salvation that killed countless god slayers. Not only that, but it also killed a lot of gods. Wu Ming said to Arthas with a raging smile on his face. When Rama held the divine blade of salvation as the last king, in addition to killing god slayers, he also killed other disobedient gods. After all, not all disobedient gods were on good terms with the last king. Just like Velaslana, if he met Rama, he would definitely challenge him until he died. Even Rama himself forgot how many enemies he killed, which meant that the enemy was not only the god slayers, but also the disobedient gods. The divine blade of salvation, huh? Then let me see its power. After that, Arthas gathered energy in the palm of his hand and formed a dark blade. Then, Arthas pointed the blade at Wu Ming. Arthas hoped that someone could defeat him, even if he died. However, this did not mean that Arthas would go easy on the opponent. To Arthas, defeating an opponent that he could not defeat was just a dream. However, Arthas especially hoped that this dream would come true. Therefore, Arthas would use all his strength to defeat Wu Ming. He's coming, you're a traveler from another world. Arthu roared angrily and sped up toward Wu Ming. I have a name. Just call me Wu Ming. Wu Ming, like Arthas, roared and rushed toward Arthas with the divine blade of salvation. Bang! Two extremely powerful weapons collided with each other, creating a huge boom. Even the air was faintly distorted. Like a signal to start, the sounds of weapons colliding became more and more frequent, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Bang! 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 The two of them kept swinging their weapons at a speed that ordinary people could not see. Whether it was Wu Ming or Arthas, both of them were simply swinging their swords. Using their reflexes and their own reaction speed, the two of them kept attacking each other with all kinds of skills. The two of them kept moving around the temple. Countless sword and saber lights were emitted from the space between the two of them. Those were simple physical impacts caused by the speed and power of the attacks being too fast. The marble floor of the temple was destroyed by the two of them like tofu. Traces of chaos appeared everywhere in the temple. Even the throne of the temple was damaged. It was enough to show the intensity of the battle between the two of them. Bang! Suddenly, Wu Ming and Artemis separated and stared at each other. I didn't expect you to be able to surpass me in hand-to-hand combat. I'm so happy. Arthas smiled like a Spartan as he looked at Wu Ming excitedly. This was taught to me by my master, the God Slayer. coupled with years of practice, I naturally have such martial arts. I'm quite interested in your martial arts, Arthas. After all, Arthas was born as a god of war and had always been the strongest. Wuming originally thought that Arthas would not be so meticulous in this aspect. As a god born from heaven and earth, shouldn't they generally be able to defeat their enemies with one move or use powerful magic? However, not only was Arthas able to fight Wuming in hand-to-hand combat, but he was also not at a disadvantage. This was beyond Wuming's expectations. Not only that, but Wuming also found that Arthas's martial arts did not seem like talent. That was why he raised this question. Then, Arthas answered Wuming's question. My strongest name indeed comes from my powerful ability, Divine Strike. However, as the god of war, how can I not know martial arts? That's right. The god of war did not just mean the god of war, but also the god of war. That was why Arthas was able to fight Wuming in hand-to-hand combat. But even so, you've reached the end of your road. As soon as Wuming finished speaking, the sword in Arthas's hand shattered instantly. It could not be helped. The sword was only created temporarily by Arthas using the energy in his body. Naturally, it was not as good as Wuming's divine sword of salvation. It was a miracle that Arthas was able to hold on for so long in hand-to-hand combat with Wuming. Arthas did not have a specific weapon. As the strongest god of war, his body was the best weapon. The collision with Wuming's divine sword of salvation proved this point. However, Arthas would not be foolish enough to go head-to-head with his opponent's divine weapon. In that case, I'll let you have a taste of my magic. Chapter 440. After Arthas finished speaking, his figure instantly disappeared and merged into the void. Immediately, the entire space in the temple began to fluctuate. Because I'm the god of war, I don't know much magic other than melee combat, and I'm not going to use magic. In that case, I only have one move left, and that is Divine Strike. That was the upgraded version of Skywing Race's Divine Strike. No, to be precise, Skywing Race's Divine Strike was an inferior version of Arthas' Divine Strike. As the creator of Skywing Race, Arthas could use all of Skywing Race's abilities. However, even though Arthas said that he didn't have many moves, the hand-to-hand combat just now was enough to prove that he was worthy of being called the god of war. However, Arthas wasn't going to use Divine Strike. Instead, he was going to use Sky Strike. You just released a simulated Sky Strike, right? Then let's see how strong my Sky Strike is. Before Wuming could react, Arthas' voice stopped abruptly, and the elves in the entire space instantly rioted. That was the fear of death that the elves, who were living energy, had. Sky Strike. There was no fancy incantation, nor was there any fancy preparation. Arthas only said that, and in an instant, a terrifying energy locked onto Wuming. Wuming could feel that it was more powerful than the Sky Strike he released with the simulated armor. Boom! The explosion occurred in the temple, which was not very big, and the flames produced by the explosion covered the entire temple. Arthas' figure emerged from the space, looking at Wuming's position in the temple, slightly surprised. Now, there was a huge and strange semicircular shield at Silent Cry's position. But upon closer inspection, it wasn't a semicircular shield at all. It was clearly a semicircular defensive barrier formed by countless shields stacked together. I didn't expect you to have such a trick, Arthas praised. As if hearing Arthas' praise, the defensive barrier formed by the shields moved. Crack! 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 With a burst of cracking sound, the shields that formed the defensive barrier disintegrated, revealing Wuming's figure. The divine sword of salvation in his hand turned into a mandala square that only revealed a few grids, floating behind Wuming. Buzz, mandala square formation shook slightly, and countless empty squares appeared behind Wuming. Then, these dozens of shields were like swallows returning to their nest, all of them safely and automatically entering the squares. All the shields went into all the empty squares, no more, no less. Subsequently, the Manchala square condensed and turned into a shining platinum holy sword. It was the divine sword of salvation. Those shields were the Manchala square's divine sword of salvation's divine sword. The moment Arthas released the sky attack, Wuming turned the divine sword of salvation into the Manchala square. He took out the countless defensive equipment stored in the Manchala square to form a semicircular defensive barrier. When Wuming was in the God Slayer's world, the holy sword light cannon that he released was blocked by the Aegis shield in the Manchala square by the last king, Rama. However, that was a god's clone after all. Meanwhile, Arthas, who was facing Wuming, was the real god of this world. Wuming dared not be careless, so he surrounded himself with tens of shields. Although Wuming would not die even if he was hit by the sky attack, who would want to take it head-on if they could defend themselves? I see. Is that the function of this divine weapon? It's a great weapon. Even I want to take it for myself. Arthas had a smile on his face. He was excited to have an opponent who could defeat him. Come at me if you can, Artemisia. I have a lot of treasures. Wuming was not mad at Arthas for being a robber. Instead, he encouraged Arthas while smiling. Try my god relic barrage next, Arthas. Wuming tossed the divine sword of salvation behind him as soon as he was done speaking. There were ripples in the air as if it had melted into water. Subsequently, countless illusory grids appeared behind Wuming. The countless swords, sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and other weapons in the grids were aimed at Arthas. Subsequently, countless god relics were shot at Arthas as he frowned. You can't hurt me if that's all you've got. Arthas used his spatial ability to hide in an alternate dimension as he spoke. However, Wuming had no intention of stopping at all. Instead, he sped up the speed of the god relic's barrage. Bang! 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 Wave after wave of god relics were shot at where Arthas was hiding. All of the god relics hit the ground directly, causing an intense explosion. It was only natural that such an outcome would happen because Arthas had already entered an alternate dimension. However, some of the weapons were distorted when they passed through the alternate dimension that Arthas was hiding in. Wuming stopped the god relic's barrage and retrieved all of them with the Manchala formation's retrieval function. Arthas, who had just emerged from the alternate dimension, was next. At the moment, there were wounds all over his body. There were even a couple of piercing wounds on his chest and abdomen. I can't believe you have a god relic that can pierce through dimensions. Arthas frowned. That was right. There were a couple of god relics that could pierce through dimensions hidden among the god relics. As Arthas was careless, the god relics hurt him when they pierced through his body. Apart from that, the god relics were on par with grade A relics. It was a piece of cake for them to break through Arthas's defense. Wuming was surprised that there were only a couple of piercing wounds on Arthas when there were so many god relics at the same time. However, it did not matter to him. So, I've broken through your dimensional ability, Arthas. Wuming smiled at Arthas. Now, Arthas could no longer use his dimensional ability to avoid being hurt. If Lin Huang were to use a skill that targeted space and crushed Arthas's divine marrow, Arthas would die. Arthas wanted someone to defeat him. He did not mind being killed, but he did not want to die in such a humiliating way. The reason why Arthas was still alive despite having so many piercing wounds on his body was that his divine marrow was not hit. In other words, Arthas had protected his divine marrow when he was attacked. However, even if he managed to protect his divine marrow, Arthas would not choose to use his dimensional ability to dodge Wuming's god relic's barrage again. First of all, he would really die if Lin Huang managed to break through his divine marrow's defense. Moreover, Arthas was a god of combat. He knew that the best defense was offense. I don't like defense. Attacking suits me better. Arthas's eyes gleamed as soon as he was done speaking. An energy sword appeared in his hand again. Then, I'll be a little more serious. Then, the two of them began to fight again. Chapter 441. Wu-Ming and Artesio's battlefield had changed. Wu-Ming felt that Artesio's war god temple was too small, so he took out the staff of Anziwergen and activated the inherent barrier. Artesio was not afraid of the enemy's home ground. Instead, he was more excited. Although the body was made by Wu-Ming's main body, the staff of Anziwergen and other items in Wu-Ming's Dragoness dimension were real. The principle was to open a new door in Wu-Ming's Dragoness dimension. That door was the secret pattern on the root dragon's body made by Wu-Ming, so those items were real. The third floor of the great underground tomb of Nazalik. Wu-Ming's figure shuttled through the tomb temple on the third floor, followed by a white figure. It was Artesio. The first floor and the second floor were directly destroyed by Wu-Ming and Artesio, so the two's battlefield came to the tomb temple on the third floor. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. After that, Wu-Ming's figure disappeared from Artesio's eyes. Ha! Space-time manipulation. Artesio was worthy of being an expert in space-time manipulation. He recognized the nature of the Phoenix incarnation at a glance. Sure enough, you saw through it. Wu-Ming's voice came from the void. Because he was too fast, his voice sounded like it came from all directions. The Phoenix incarnation was said to speed up his speed, but the principle was to enter the lightning speed state. That lightning speed state actually allowed him to enter a different accelerated space from this space-time. In this space, everything became incomparably slow, and one's body also gained the ability to accelerate by a small margin. However, the price was an overload on one's body. If a new Godslayer were to use this skill, his body would experience severe pain due to overload in less than a minute. But for Wu-Ming, the root dragon, who had extremely high physical fitness, that was not a problem at all. That was why Wu-Ming could use Phoenix without any side effects. Come and feel my space-time manipulation. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, he suddenly appeared behind Artemisio. Artemisio, on the other hand, was too shocked by Wu-Ming's methods to react. Thus, there was a short lapse in his memory. However, compared to a battle between experts, this moment of inattention would often become the key to victory or defeat. Go down. After saying that, Wu-Ming immediately raised his divine power, which was enchanted with Giant's instant cast, and smashed it toward Artesius's heart. Boom! In an instant, Arthur's figure was buried under the dark stone slabs of the Temple of Tombs. At the same time, the entire floor of the third floor shattered. In short, just like the first and second floor, the entire third floor was destroyed. Boom! Accompanied by a loud roar, the sky above the fourth floor of the underground lake seemed to be broken, and countless broken stones and other things came to the fourth floor of the underground lake. Plop, 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 accompanied by the sound of countless stones falling into the water, Wu-Ming's figure floated above the lake. Wu-Ming looked at the lake vigilantly. The blow just now did hit Artesio's heart, but Wu-Ming had a feeling that Artesio was not dead yet. Although Wu-Ming hid his 12 incarnations' ability to surprise Artesio, he successfully used Phoenix to speed up Artesio, and then used Giant's power to hit Artesio. However, Artesio must have some means to avoid fatal injuries. Wu-Ming heard from Shiobi that if you want to kill a god, you must destroy the god's divine essence. Just like human heart and brain, the divine essence was the root of the god. The elven corridor was also the first to give birth to the god's divine essence. However, unlike human heart and brain, the god's divine essence was not necessarily in the heart, and it might not even be in the brain, but in any part of the body. Moreover, the god's weakness was really only the divine essence. Unlike human heart and brain, serious injuries to other parts of the body may also be fatal. The god's body was not afraid of physical damage. In fact, the god's body was a practical skin bag. As long as the divine essence was intact, the god could even abandon the body and make another one. Wuming did hit Artesio's heart just now. Under that kind of attack, even Artesio's body should be dead if the divine essence was in the heart. Since Wuming could still feel that Artesio was still alive, it meant that Artesio's divine essence was probably not in the heart. Not to mention that, Wuming put a lot of effort in order to kill Artesio with one blow. Wuming's current divine essence was not as powerful as his original body, so he could only use his 12 incarnations one by one, and their power was greatly reduced. In addition, he couldn't use double incarnations normally. The Titan incarnation just now could be so powerful because of overload, but also because of that, Wuming's Titan ability was temporarily unavailable. Because Wuming used Titan incarnation, the slate representing Titan incarnation in Wuming's heart was in a blood-red state, which meant that this ability was temporarily unavailable. That was the price of instantaneous power, but it was also the price of overloading, and that price would take about 3 days. Titan incarnation was Wuming's most commonly used ability. After all, it was simple and crude. Now that this ability was sealed, Wuming could be said to have lost a great help. However, it couldn't be said to be absolute. Simply put, it wasn't a big deal. Then, Artesio flew out of the underground lake. Sure enough, although Artesio was in a mess, and his heart was protruding, Artesio did not show any signs of dying. There was no doubt that the spirit essence was not in his heart. Because Wuming attacked from behind, the left part of his chest that was covered by his clothes bulged. Speaking of which, the scene of a man's chest bulging was too beautiful to believe. You wanted to hit my spirit essence from the beginning? That's a good plan. Although Wuming didn't use any tricks at all. I have to say, you're really a monster, Artesio. Even if Wuming didn't hit his spirit essence, he should have been affected by Wuming's Titan incarnation, but Artesio didn't show any signs of damage. Ha ha ha. I am the strongest god of war, the god of war. Artesio roared, and the spirit essence in his body was activated, and all the damage on his body was healed. He looked just like when he first met Wuming. You should have more trump cards, right? I know I'm going to lose soon, but my pride won't allow me to admit defeat. Artesio was really smart. He also knew that he would be defeated by Wuming later, so he said it bluntly. In that case, I will bet everything I have to release this final divine strike.